Welcome to Haunting Whispered. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video? Ever wondered what happens when darkness falls and the rain starts? Stay with us to find out in tonight's chilling stories. Let the gentle rain and these chilling tales carry you off to sleep. Sweet dreams. Every night a different person walks down the street and screams for help. We aren't allowed to help them. Looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed-over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. Cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. Two girls were peeking around my door frame. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, getting the old college rule, only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah, about 5 seconds ago." "Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" The other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans and was now tugging at her long red braid. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the two strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "What?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there." She pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour, but we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "We never know when it's coming." "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why." I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. "I don't believe you." The girl shrugged. "You don't have to. You'll see for yourself." The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. "We'll come back later," Gianna said matter-of-factly. "We'll show you." Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo short. His name, I was told, was Mateo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor, next to the window, and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. "Do you all live in this building?" I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. "Yeah," Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. "This building is where all the young people live." "It's where they put us." Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. "We've all been sorted out." "Forgive her. She's a bit of a conspiracy theorist." "It's not a theory," she snapped, glaring at him. "Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers. People with kids but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building. May, tell him." So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. "Stop it," May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. "You'll scare her. I'm not scared." She just shrugged at me, as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around, and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit, it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Mateo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with Mai, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet, and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. "Do not interfere." "It's coming," Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Mateo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There it was again, that chill. Crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something. Maybe I was just sweating. We sat there, unmoving, for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. "Help. Please, my God, someone help me." Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes. Had to confirm there was actually someone out there, like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. "Please, I'm hurt." I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. "What is this?" I demanded loudly. "What the hell is this?" May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. Pulled away from her. "Arden, please." "We have to help him. Why can't we help him? He's just an old man." "We can't help him, trust me." I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now facing our building. His head was tilted upwards and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. "Help me," he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human, or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms, or I should say, his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. "Please, please, please, please." May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass and yelped in pain and horror. "What is that thing?" I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. "We don't know," May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him like he might topple over. "We just know to follow the rules." "What happens if you don't follow the rules?" I asked and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. "A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl." "Shannon," Gianna butted in. "Her name was Shannon." Sorry, her name is Shannon." I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. "What happened?" Mateo shook his head. "We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know? No use in dwelling on it. But that night, we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her." He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. "Then what?" He shrugged. "Nothing. She was just gone." I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it, I had witnessed it firsthand, and it terrified me. "Why doesn't anyone leave?" He shrugged for a second time. "Can't afford it, or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows." I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason, I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it. They cared, or it scared them, especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me, anyways. I was a college dropout, and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things. Like they're coming, like I don't want to die, or even I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones, it was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that? She said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with Mai, mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day, bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found, just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday. As May walked through the door, Matteo blew into his plastic party horn. Paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. Jesus Christ, you fuckers know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read, Happy Birthday, May, in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. How does it feel? Fucking awful. That's the spirit. Enough of this, Matteo cut in, weaving between them. Let's eat some cake, then let's go. Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually, they said, they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pregame, while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Matteo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May. My other shoulder rammed into the car door. Matteo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them. I hooked my arm around Mai's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. Took shots, followed them out for smoke breaks. I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blister. By the time we got to our third bar, couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains. But before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. You never gave me a birthday present, she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice, and then it wasn't. Hey, Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. Arden, where's everybody else? I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. Dunno. Why? What's up? He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. Time: 1:47 a.m. It's getting late, he narrated. Can we find the others and get going? I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Mateo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand. Just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street, it happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. Do not interfere. Mateo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless that, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies, and this neighborhood, right now, was the spider's web. Will drove slowly now. Maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still. We were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knees shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze, all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw. A silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction, and in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent, "Help me." "Will," Gianna hissed. "Turn the car around." Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. Didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. "Help me, please help." I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. "Maybe," Mai whispered. Her arm shook against mine. "Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us." Deep down, it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. Didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. It was so weak. "Shannon." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mateo was the one to break the silence. "What?" "Shannon," he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. "That's Shannon." I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs. The girl from Will's phone lock screen. Girl who had disappeared. "Shannon." May gasped next to me. "Dude," Mateo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. "I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car." Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. "I have to help her," he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. "Help me! Help! Help me, please, someone! It hurts!" It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. "I have to help her," Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Mateo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. "Will, that is not Shannon." Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. "I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude. And I know you miss her, but please, please don't do this." Their voices were getting louder and more distraught. I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. Thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head, left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. Boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore. and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth. No tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Matteo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Matteo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream, but instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her, like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off, like the one I had heard that one night, far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Matteo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. Couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van and the blinding red light, pulling around the corner. Then, nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but, as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game. I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night or if it was something else. And I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help. I didn't interfere. That was just the beginning. Our next tale is even more disturbing. There's people in the basement. Hey man, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's people in the basement. Chris's words were in between silence and a whisper. I sat up in the bed, my eyes adjusting to the frantic figure in front of me. What? I asked him. What are you talking about? Be quiet, dude, he whispered. There's people in the fucking basement. 6 of them, I swear to God. He paused, taking a few deep breaths. We should get the fuck out of here. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get the fatigue to settle so I could comprehend the magnitude of what he was saying. Context: my friends and I had booked an Airbnb near the mountains for the weekend. Hike and then drink. Get our minds off of work and school. I had been super tired after hiking, so I'd taken a nap. I shook my head. You went down into the basement? I asked. We weren't supposed to. They told us not to. Yeah, dude, I know, Chris continued. But I did it anyway, and I saw people down there, and we need to fucking leave ASAP. What kind of people? I asked, pretty much fully awake now. You mean the owners of this place? They came back? Chris shook his head. Not them. Weird-looking people. Creepy-ass fucking people. I sat up, thinking that maybe Chris had taken some of the LSD we'd been saving for the next day. Buck, dude, relax. Explain exactly what you saw. He laid it out pretty concisely. Despite the fact that the people who had posted the listing had explicitly told us not to go down there, Chris had gotten drunk, gotten curious, and went down there. To his surprise, the door had been unlocked. He couldn't find the light switch, but there was just enough of it coming through the windows for him to be able to make his way down the stairs. Arriving at the bottom, he allowed his eyes a few seconds to adjust, and right in front of him, he could see a small table, with about 6 people sitting around it, their outlines illustrated by the afternoon light. First, his brain rationalized it as large dolls or puppets that had been placed there, but he continued looking at them, and eventually one of them turned their heads to face him. He didn't stick around after that and shot up the stairs, shutting the door behind him. As he told me this, I kind of didn't want to believe him. But there was also absolutely no reason why he'd be lying. He just wasn't that type of guy. Coupled with the genuine terror on his face, I began leaning towards the idea that he was telling the truth, and that were actually a bunch of people sitting silent at a table in the darkness of the basement. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, seeing Jay and Paul standing on the front porch, grilling burgers. Then I looked back at Chris. If you're telling the truth, We need to call the people who own the place. I tried, he said. They didn't pick up. I've sent them texts as well. I shook my head. So what? You think they're dangerous? Should we call the cops? Chris shrugged. I don't know, he said. I don't know if they're dangerous, but they are. As fuck didn't look right, and I want to get out of here. For a while, we stared at each other, the general silence of the house becoming progressively more ominous. After a while, I sighed. Yeah, let's get out of here. We grabbed our phones, wallets, the car keys, and moved down the stairs, out of the house as fast as we could. Jay and Paul were laughing, holding beers as we approached them. Paul turned around, pointing a greasy spatula towards us. You guys hungry or what? He asked. Chris began telling them what he'd seen, but it was obvious that they were more than a few drinks deep, and not taking anything he was saying seriously. Dude, it sounds like you're fucking tripping, Jay said. Are you sure you're not tripping? I'm being serious, Chris said. I swear to fucking God, I'm serious. You need to get out of here now. Well, I'm about 5 beers in, so I ain't driving, Jay said, and I sure as hell ain't letting any of you drive my truck either. Are you sure you just weren't seeing shit? Fine, I'm walking then, Chris said. I'm not staying here. Look, I'll go down there and talk to them, Paul said, half joking. See what the hell they want. Jay laughed as sheer disbelief washed over Chris's face. I'm not bullshitting, man, he said. I'm not. Yeah, I believe you, Paul said dismissively. I'll go and see what's up. Chris continued to protest, but Paul wouldn't budge, and soon he was inside the house, making his way towards the basement. Chris shook his head, his eyes wide, nearly bulging out of his head at this point. Fuck this, he yelled, seeming to grow more agitated by the second. I fucking warned you. Before we could say anything else, he bolted, sprinting like a bat out of hell towards the woods. We tried chasing after him, but couldn't come close to matching his play. We stopped, panting for air, as he watched him disappear into the trees. What the fuck? Jay asked. Is he being serious? I thought it was a joke. I shook my head. Let's go check on Paul. We ran back to the house, entering to see the basement door wide open. The place was completely silent, but before I could call out, I could hear somebody moving up the stairs. I backed up, unsure of what to expect, how to react, when Paul came out of the darkness, looking somewhat bewildered. He looked at us, shook his head. This is freaky, man, he said. Was he being for real? Jay asked. There's people down there? Not exactly. The 3 of us went down there with my nerves yet to be completely settled. We couldn't find a light switch, but there were enough windows and enough daylight for us to move around. Turns out Chris hadn't been totally correct, but probably hadn't been lying either. Planted right in front of the stairs was a table with 3 chairs. Sitting in those 3 chairs were some of the most lifelike sculptures I'd ever seen. 2 soldiers in what appeared to be old military outfits, and a woman in some kind of long, religious dress. They weren't quite enough to be uncanny. If you looked at them for more than a few seconds, you could tell that they were carved from stone, and then meticulously painted, something you could confirm by touching them. Still, they were exceptionally crafted, something that could have only been achieved by a dedicated professional. I mean, I don't blame him, Paul said, referring to Chris. I almost shat bricks when I first saw them. I mean, what the fuck? I remembered back to the conversation I'd had with him, how he'd claimed that one of them had actually looked at him, and then a shiver ran down my spine. Jay laughed, palpable relief in his voice. How much you think we could sell these for? I'm down to take them and find out. Paul joked. On the surface, it made enough sense. The homeowners were in possession of some very valuable items that they stored in the basement, simply forgetting to lock it this time around. Jay and Paul continued looking at them, taking pictures, marveling at how weird it all was. On the other hand, I wasn't so keen on doing so. I wanted to get the hell out of the basement, ASAP. The details just weren't adding up. I knew Chris well. If the only thing he'd seen had been these statues, he would not have reacted the way he did. Jay was looking at his phone, smiling at the pictures he'd taken, when suddenly his expression dropped. He put his phone down and looked ahead. There's another one over there, he said, in the corner. What do you mean? Paul asked, looking closely at one of the soldiers' rifles. Another statue in the corner. Paul looked up and looked towards where Jay was pointing. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, I see it." The two of them continued to look at it but showed no indication of wanting to explore it. Instead, they stood still, their expressions slowly being taken over by a look of deep unease. Eventually, I looked as well. It did appear to be a statue, something tucked away in one of the very dark corners. It was tall, extremely so, maybe 7 feet, its head well eclipsing the top of one of the bookshelves. Its bottom half was completely obscured. From what the light was revealing, it was wearing some kind of helmet, like those steel ones soldiers were equipped with back in WU1. There came a point, as my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, where a pit began to form in my stomach. Its features were slowly revealing themselves, and it almost looked as if it were twitching. I thought that maybe it was just the darkness playing tricks until I saw it blink. Clear as day, blinked. I guess the other two saw the same thing because we were practically trampling each other running up the stairs. We slammed the door shut behind us before quickly pushing one of the couches in front of it. Paul and I were halfway out the front door, but Jay was still inside the house. "What the hell are you doing?" Paul yelled at him. "Come on, I need my laptop," Jay said before throwing Paul his keys. "I'll be quick. Start the truck." He ran up the stairs while Paul continued to curse at him. "Really, dude? Are you fucking serious?" And then I remembered my own laptop, thinking about how annoying it would be if I were to lose it. I looked at the basement door, then at the stairs, then at Paul. "It's gonna take 5 seconds," I said. I could hear him cursing behind me as I ran, jumping 3 steps at a time until I reached my room, darting in and grabbing my laptop from the desk. As I rushed out of there, I saw that the door to Jay's room was shut. I stopped, slowed my breathing. I was almost certain that he hadn't gone back downstairs. I would have seen or heard him. I approached the door. "Jay," I asked, "the hell are you doing?" No response. I looked at the door, but every muscle was frozen, almost as if my body were warning me not to go in. Suddenly, it creaked open just slightly, and I jumped back. "Jay?" I asked. Still no response. I couldn't see anything through the crack until my eyes drifted upwards near the ceiling, a pair of eyes looking down at me, large eyes set too far apart on a face with skin that was too pale. I turned and bolted back downstairs as I heard the door swing open the rest of the way. Of course, I didn't look back and ran outside and jumped into the passenger's seat of the truck. "Where is he?" Paul asked. "Just fucking drive," I told him. He didn't protest and stepped on the gas, ripping down the dirt road. We continued driving until we reached a rest stop, first place with other people. By that point, we had both called and messaged the homeowners about a dozen times each. Nothing but radio silence on the other end. We even noticed that the listing itself had been removed from Airbnb entirely. And then we called the police. Somebody answered and I explained the situation as in-depth as I could. The operator listened without interrupting, waited a few seconds, and then asked me for the address. I told it to her. Another bout of silence elapsed before she hung up. After arriving back in the city, we considered reporting it again, but neither of us felt the nerve to do so. We also haven't heard from Chris. We've gone to his apartment and knocked on his door, but nobody answers. I tried to do some research on the place, Googling the cabin's address. One result came up. A website that appeared to consist solely of an album of black and white images of soldiers standing in various places, with dates and addresses written beneath them in small text. I Control F and found the address I was looking for. The accompanying photo was of a tall soldier holding a blood-stained hatchet and standing in a clearing surrounded by trees, with the outline of a cabin behind him. The man's skin was pale, his eyes oddly large and set so wide apart that it just didn't look right. There were also 2 dates attached to it, August 17th, 1915, and the date that we had first arrived at the cabin. Been about a week removed from the incident, and Paul and I have both made a mutual decision to drop it, try and go back to our ordinary lives. But it's been difficult. I keep expecting to receive a phone call from the cops, asking me questions about Chris and Jay, where I'd last seen them. Those guys have family. They probably knew where they were headed and who they'd gone with. And yet, nobody's reaching out. It doesn't feel like we're out of the clear here. Doesn't feel like this is over at all. If you thought that was unsettling, wait until you hear what comes next. My dad is a serial killer. Yeah, you read that right. I am the daughter of a man with over 20 confirmed killings. You would never guess that from how I grew up. Our family consisted of my dad, mom, and 2 brothers. We lived a happy childhood, probably happier than most kids. My mom was a traditional stay-at-home mom and cooked almost all of our meals from scratch. Dad would come home at exactly 6:30 p.m. every day, and we'd eat together as a family. Mom and Dad loved each other. He'd bring her flowers, and they left each other notes all the time. Even though Dad worked 10-hour shifts Monday through Friday, he'd be sure to make time to tuck us in every night and read us stories to sleep. He never missed a night, until my 10th birthday. I remember my 10th birthday as if it was yesterday. My day started with Mom making me birthday pancake. She did that for all of our birthdays. Pancakes cooked with chocolate chips and topped with sprinkles and whipped cream. We were a healthy family, and breakfasts were typically fruit, yogurt, eggs, or oatmeal. This is why pancakes for breakfast was such a treat. "Where's Dad?" I asked as I took a bite of my pancake. "He went to work early." She'd said it quickly and tried to change the subject. "Are you excited for your party?" I nodded, mouth still full of my breakfast. I was having a Spider-Man themed party. I loved Spider-Man. Even as a girl, I always asked for Spider-Man themed things. My parents weren't thrilled about it, but my bed covers were Spider-Man themed, and I had so many action figures. I was excited to decorate for my party with Spider-Man plates, tablecloths, and balloons. Around 3 o'clock, my friends started arriving. I was excited, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with my dad. It was Saturday. He wasn't supposed to be at work, but Mom had said he went in early. As the night rolled on, I swam, opened presents, and had cake. I finally got my mind off of my missing dad and watched the Spider-Man movies with my friends. Nighttime came and my friends left. I quickly fell asleep on the couch after an enjoyably exhausting day. I woke up in my bed at some point in the middle of the night. I heard something outside that sounded like metal hitting against metal. Rubbing my eyes, I walked over to my bedroom window and peeked outside. Dad was shoveling dirt into a hole. I watched as he wiped sweat off of his forehead and returned the shovel to the shed. He came inside, and I ran back to my bed. Minutes later, I heard his footsteps as he walked past my door, and I closed my eyes to feign sleep. My door creaked, and Dad walked in. He gave me a kiss on my forehead and whispered, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," and left, closing the door quietly. Dad would go out late at night and return in the early mornings, often smelling of dirt and body odor. But months went by before Dad did something really weird. It was another Saturday, and Dad was gone all day. I don't think he thought my brothers and I saw him grab the box of trash bags before walking out the door. My brother Joey was 5 years older than me and told me he thought our dad was cheating. I found an earring in his truck. "How do you know it wasn't Mom's?" I asked, anger filling me. I didn't want anyone talking bad about Dad. "It was Pink Star. When have you ever seen Mom wear those kind of earrings? Plus, he keeps a change of clothes and a pillow in the back. I think he sleeps at someone else's house. He stays out all night and doesn't come home till morning." "You don't know that," I yelled. I ran to my room and slammed my door. I cried as I thought of the idea that my dad was cheating on my mom. They seemed to have such a wonderful relationship. They never fought and always talked about what bothered them. I remember making a disgusted face every time they kissed in front of me. I'd exclaim, "Ew!" One night, Dad left again. My brothers came into my room. My older brother devised a plan to catch him. Of course, my younger brother, Liam, wanted to be involved. But I thought he was too young, at only 6 years old, to be a part of our plan. When he threatened to tell on us tomorrow, Mom, we had no choice but to comply. Joey said that we would hide in the bed of the truck. Dad kept a large blue tarp over it so we could easily hide. He was already gone that night, so we decided to hide the following day. He was going out almost every weekend at that point. He snuck out Friday night at 9 p.m. We waited under the tarp, hearts beating out of our chests. The stress of it all got to Liam, and he let out a small cry. I slapped my hand over his mouth. "Quiet, he's coming," I sternly whispered. Sure enough, Dad was getting in the car. He drove and drove. I guessed it was over 2 hours before he stopped. When we heard the truck door slam shut, we snuck a peek. We seemed to be at some sort of hardware store, but not the Lowe's or Home Depot that I was used to seeing. We hid and waited. Dad drove for a long time before stopping. All I heard was him getting out of the car and the sounds of shoes on gravel. After being sure he walked far away from view, we peeked again. "Where are we?" I asked. Joey looked around. "I dunno. Looks like a cabin or something. This is fucking weird." "Hey, no cursing." I was protective of our youngest brother and didn't want him repeating the bad things Joey said. "Sorry, but it's true. I'm gonna follow him." I grabbed Joey's arm. "Wait, what if he sees you?" Joey shrugged. "I'll call him an asshole for cheating on Mom." I sat in the bed hugging Liam to my chest. He had tears rolling down his cheeks. We waited for what seemed like years. And then I saw her. I saw a figure running in the darkness. Didn't look human until it came closer. Started running to the truck. I watched as a woman felt against the driver's side of the truck. She was bleeding and naked. There were bruises all over her thighs and neck. She was wheezing. In her state of fear, she didn't notice my brother and I. When she couldn't get the door open, she started running away towards the road. And that's when I started screaming for Joey. "Joey!" I jumped out of the truck, telling Liam to remain silent. "Joey!" I was barefoot, running up to the cabin. I got to the door and opened, screaming as soon as I saw what was on the other side. My dad was holding a knife against a naked, thin woman. Dropped the knife and turned around. "Kathy? What are you?" He was cut off and blood started pouring from his mouth. I felt like throwing up. Joey had stabbed our dad in the back. "We have to get out of here. We have to call the police." When I didn't move, Joey yelled at me. "Get in the truck. We have to call the police. Kathy, go." It finally hit and I ran back to the truck. Thank God this was the early 2000s and my dad had a cell phone. We had no idea where we were. "There's girls in there. Kathy, there's so many girls." It's been 15 years and I still wake up with nightmares. It took me a long time, but I looked at the crime scene photos. My dad had been torturing, assaulting, and killing girls for years. He kept them locked up in a cabin with barely enough food to survive. When he first started, he buried his first victims in the backyard. It must have gotten hard to keep that up because the police only found 2 bodies in our yard. My brother Joey is the reason some of those girls made it out. I still have no idea how he snuck in and grabbed a knife without my dad seeing. He hasn't coped well with the grief. He turned to drugs and alcohol to try to get the thoughts out of his mind. He ended up taking his own life a year ago. This is just a reminder that anyone can be a killer, even a family man with 3 wonderful kids. The darkness doesn't end there. This next story is proof that nightmares are real. My wife cries at 11 p.m. every night. The only word that I can think of that describes how I feel: inadequate. I've always wanted to do more for my wife, but she's always assured me over and over that things are fine and that she just needs the time and space to process things. Yet night after night, the routine has been the same. Just before 11 p.m., as if driven by some unseen force, Ellen rises, quietly excuses herself, and disappears into the bathroom. The door clicks shut, and the locking of the door is followed by muffled sounds of her crying, not super loud, but loud enough to be the only sound I hear once she starts. I often find myself thinking about our life together. When did this start? Did I do something? Did I miss something when we first started dating? I tend to then replay our entire relationship in my head, looking for signs while I wait for her to come out of the bathroom. We met during our junior year of college. Our first run-in was at one of those cliché frat parties, an event called Jerseys and Jorts, and as you guessed it, every guy and girl there was sporting some sort of sports jersey and a pair of cut-off jeans. Our eyes met while we were both waiting in an obnoxiously loud line for a drink. She was stunning. Then, after I probably stared a little too long, she said hello and introduced herself, Ellen Callis. She complimented my Mutombo Nuggets jersey, an old vintage jersey imbued with a rainbow of vibrant colors. I complimented her retro Robinson USA jersey, a bona fide classic. She had borrowed it from her roommate. A couple minutes into our conversation, I realized she didn't know who either Dikembe Mutombo or David Robinson were. Then we laughed at everyone in jean shorts. and how everyone would secretly look forward to somehow coming up with a new excuse or themed party where they could sport their jean shorts again. Why can't people just admit they like wearing jean shorts? We continued poking fun at Greek life at schools and somehow ended up talking about our classes and our majors, then our roommates. Felt like we talked the entire night. I was in love. We followed each other on Instagram. It took me 3 weeks of barraging her with memes, which she often hearted, before she responded with a fateful message. "Do you want to get coffee with me?" I thought I was dreaming. One morning later that week, we were in line at Picasso's Coffee. I was babbling about how much I love cold brew. When we were finally up, she ordered tea. I was so caught off guard by her order, I somehow ended up ordering a berry blast smoothie. A thought had infiltrated my mind, I guess. What if she didn't like coffee drink? When we finally sat down with our drinks, she laughed and pointed out that neither of us got a coffee, and that maybe it was a sign we would have to go again sometime soon. I officially asked Ellen to be my girlfriend at the art museum one morning, while we were finally sipping coffees. We were standing opposite Van Gogh's painting, The Ravine. It was her favorite painting in the museum. She loved talking about it. Not only is it one of his masterpieces, but underneath, there's a totally different painting, maybe another masterpiece. He struggled to pick which image he wanted to present to the viewer. I loved the way she looked at that painting. She's always been so much wiser than me. Then time flew by. At times, the years feel like a single memory. Ellen and I have been married 3 years now, and we have a beautiful 8-month-old daughter named Zoe. I like to think we're the picture of a happy family. Weekend trips to the park, family dinners, and bedtime stories every night. Ellen has been everything I ever wanted in a partner. Loving, supportive, and devoted to our family. I think we've been in love since our first coffee date, and having Zoe has only strengthened our relationship. But this peculiar fact has always weighed on me, and it's something I still, after everything, can't make sense of. Every night at 11 p.m., Ellen is in a locked bathroom and crying. When she returns, her eyes are a little red, but she smiles and insists everything is fine. The truth is, I can't quite remember exactly when it started, but I'm almost sure I first noticed it a couple weeks after we moved into the new house. Looking back, maybe it did start around then. It was a lot of change quickly. In 1 year, we got engaged and then married. I lost my job, and it took longer to find a new one than we expected. Ellen lost her mom to breast cancer, and then we found out we had a baby on the way. I figured this was Ellen's way of coping. Grief, stress, enormous change. I tried to give her space, hoping she'd tell me when she was ready. "Ellen, are you okay?" I asked her as she slowly climbed into bed one night. The crying had been more intense than usual. She looked as if she was hiding physical pain. She responded with a gentle smile, her eyes still glistening from the remnants of tears she hadn't fully wiped away. "I'm okay, really. Just thinking about things," she finally said. "What kind of things?" I pressed gently. She waved it off, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and changed the subject. I let it drop, thinking it was just a rough patch. We all have those, right? But as time went on, I realized it wasn't just a phase. It was something much deeper, something that didn't fade. Her 11 p.m. ritual continued. No matter where we were, on vacation, at a friend's house, even out at dinner on a date night, at 11 p.m., she'd find a bathroom, go in alone, and cry. One day, I hoped that Ellen would bring it up to me in bed. That one topic that your partner finally feels safe enough to share with you, just as you are both about to doze off. Some strong mixture of sleepy comfort and courage. I was ready for any explanation, but I realize now I'll never know. I'm sorry, I read back what I've written and haven't made it clear. I guess in some ways, Ellen is here with Zoe and I. We lost Ellen in a car accident recently. On July 5th, just before dawn, Ellen got up early one morning to go meet her dad at the harbor for a mile swim. It was a tradition of theirs, always the morning after the 4th. They joked that their time in the water calmed down the fish, who were spooked by all of the fireworks from the night before. She never made it to the pier. She was hit by a drunk driver who was just coming home from the bars. So it's me and Zoe now, and our families. My parents have been helping out as much as they can, though they both still work. Ellen's dad tried his best for a few days, but I think the grief of losing both his wife and daughter was too much. Just a few days after Ellen's funeral, he abruptly said he needed to go to Greece to visit family, which I didn't even know they had. I look back now and wish I had asked Ellen's dad about it after I first noticed. Had they ever noticed it when Ellen lived at home? Or maybe I should have pushed further with Ellen herself to get an answer. I could have mentioned therapy. I could have gone with her and we could have figured it out together. But now I find myself in the same position, unable to help someone I love. The night Ellen died after the hospital, after sitting for hours in that cold fluorescent waiting room, I finally came home with Zoe. My mom and dad stayed over with us. Just a baby, too young to understand what had happened. But that night, when I put Zoe to bed, she started crying. It was loud and heart-wrenching, nothing like the soft cries of a sleepy baby. I held her, soothing her as best I could until she finally calmed down. It wasn't until later, after she'd fallen asleep in my arms, that I glanced at the clock. It was just a few minutes after 11 p.m. My stomach dropped. I hoped it was maybe just a coincidence. Though as the days and nights passed, it was clear. Every night at 11 p.m. on the dot, Zoe cries a horrible cry. Her body writhes as if she's in some great pain. I can't do anything for her. I hold her tightly in my arms and just let her cry out. Feeling hopeless, I finally confided in my parents about Zoe's nightly crying. At first, they thought I was just overwhelmed with grief, imagining things. In their defense, I couldn't bring myself to explain that Ellen did the same thing. It's like I was embarrassed to admit it. Not embarrassed of Ellen, but embarrassed I didn't do more to help. My parents did say, no matter what was going on, I should get Zoe looked at it if she was crying terribly all the time. I first took her to our regular pediatrician. Dr. Conley performed a comprehensive physical exam, checking Zoe's vitals, growth metrics, and reflexes, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After a thorough discussion of her symptoms, including the recurrent 11 p.m. onset of intense screaming and crying, Dr. Connolly suggested we rule out any underlying sleep disorders, such as parasomnia or night terrors. However, when initial polysomnography tests came back normal, he referred us to a pediatric neurologist for further evaluation, suspecting a possible neurological component. After a week of waiting, a neurologist named Dr. Patel conducted a full neurological examination, assessing Zoe's cranial nerve function, motor coordination, and sensory responses. She ordered an electroencephalogram, an EEG she called it, to monitor for abnormal electrical brain activity, looking for signs of nocturnal epilepsy or other seizure disorders. When the EEG results returned unremarkable, Dr. Patel recommended advanced neuroimaging, including an MRI and a PET scan, to investigate any structural or metabolic abnormalities in Zoe's brain. The scans, however, showed no signs of lesions, tumors, or any abnormalities in her cerebral cortex or limbic system, leaving Dr. Patel as perplexed as I was. Despite the extensive battery of tests, everything pointed to a perfectly healthy child. Yet the unexplained crying persisted like clockwork. After several visits and countless tests, the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. Zoe was perfectly healthy. In the end, Dr. Patel offered one suggestion, an explanation that was almost impossible to test. Her body reacting to something that wasn't physically there, but perhaps emotionally imprinted. It was the only explanation she could offer, though it left me with more questions than answers. Last week, while I was holding Zoe tightly as she let out a long, drawn-out wail, starting with a high-pitched scream, almost ear-piercing, I knew hearing it was the only way I could get help, so I grabbed my phone and started recording. I did this for 3 nights in a row. Then I drafted an email with the recordings to Dr. Patel's office with a simple note. Please, listen to these. I sent them over Friday morning. Today, my mom came over and watched Zoe for me while I caught up on work from last week. Around 3 p.m., my mom barreled into my office, my phone in her hand. Dr. Patel was calling. I shot up from my desk, grabbed my phone, and answered. Dr. Patel explained that she's been listening to the recordings of Zoe crying all weekend and is astonished that a child can generate such a loud, agonizing cry. Did you edit these? She finally asked me. Of course not, I answered. From an infant? No, from any person. I have never heard anything like this in my life. She continued. She then asked me if we could come in for more tests tomorrow night, from 10 p.m. to midnight. Dr. Patel wants to take new scans during an episode. Yes, thank you so much. I nearly yelled back on the phone when she asked my thoughts on the plan. It's 10:44 p.m. now. I'm going to get ready to hold Zoe in my arms and tell her again and again that it will be over soon. She doesn't need to cry. Even though I know deep down, I don't know if I can help her. I hope the tests tomorrow bring answers. Some horrors leave scars, others never let go. Let's delve into another chilling mystery. Emily's confession. There's a moment in every therapist's life when a patient says something so haunting that it lingers in the quiet of their office long after the session has ended. That moment, for me, came the day I met Emily. She walked in at exactly 10 a.m., her punctuality almost unnerving. She wore a pale blue dress, simple yet elegant, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes, calm, cerulean blue, bore the look of someone completely at ease. No nervous twitches, no subtle discomfort. I should have known then. I should have recognized it, but her composure seemed natural. First, Dr. Gardner? She asked as she stepped into my office. Yes, and you must be Emily. Please have a seat. She smiled faintly, almost politely, before sitting down across from me, crossing her legs in a way that suggested poise, not anxiety. She held her hands in her lap, glancing around my office briefly, as though taking in her surroundings in one smooth sweep. I could tell she was someone who noticed details, small, insignificant things, like the crooked diploma on my wall, or the slight ring of coffee that stained the edge of my desk. So, Emily, I began, opening her intake form. It says here that you've been struggling with some issues regarding control. She tilted her head slightly, her smile not fading, but somehow deepening. Control is a funny thing, Dr. Gardner, she said, her voice smooth, almost melodic. We all like to think we have it, don't we? Over our lives, our choices, our surroundings. But how much of it is real? I nodded, trying to feel out the direction she was taking the conversation. That's a very insightful observation. Are you saying that you feel like you don't have control over your life? Her smile widened a bit. No, that's not quite it. I have plenty of control. In fact, I have more control than most people ever dream of. Something about the way she said it made the hair on my arms rise. There was no boastfulness in her tone, just a simple, quiet confidence that unnerved me. I shifted slightly in my chair and decided to probe further. Can you explain that a bit more? She looked at me, her gaze unwavering. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to control someone else completely? My hand froze over the notepad. There it was, that shift in the air, that subtle prickling that crept along the back of my neck. I felt it before I understood what was happening. I took a slow breath. I'm not sure I follow, I said carefully. Are you talking about manipulation or something else? Emily laughed softly, the sound light and pleasant, but it didn't match the darkness of her words. Manipulation is amateur work. I'm talking about something much deeper, something much more intimate. She uncrossed her legs, leaning forward slightly, her hands resting on her knees. Her smile faded, replaced by an intensity that made my mouth go dry. Let me tell you a story, Dr. Gardner, she began, her voice lowering just a fraction. I've never shared this with anyone, but I think you'll appreciate it. I nodded, my heart beginning to race though I kept my face neutral. Therapists hear disturbing things all the time, but something about the way she spoke, like she was about to confess something unspeakable, set my nerves alight. There was a man, she continued, her eyes locked onto mine, about 6 months ago. His name was Paul. He lived in this quaint little house at the edge of town, the kind of place where the neighbors never hear anything, no matter what happens inside. Her gaze didn't waver, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes, something dark, twisted, and eager. I watched him for weeks, she said softly, as though recalling a cherished memory. Followed him on his way to work, observed him at the grocery store, learned his routines. He was so ordinary, so predictable. I swallowed, forcing my voice to remain calm. What made you choose him? Her smile returned, but this time it was colder, sharper. That's the thing, Dr. Gardner. I didn't choose him. He chose me, in a way. His carelessness, his vulnerability, his arrogance, it all led him to me. I was simply there to help him. My mind raced. Was this some kind of delusion? fantasy she'd constructed to cope with something else. But the way she spoke, it felt too real, too precise. What happened to Paul, Emily? Her eyes glittered. I visited him one night. He didn't expect me, of course. I waited until he was asleep, and then I let myself in. Didn't even hear me. Her voice took on a strange, almost dreamlike quality as she spoke, as though she were reliving the moment in her mind. I sat frozen, the notepad on my lap now forgotten. I stood over him for a long time, just watching him sleep. There's something beautiful about it, you know? Watching someone so unaware, so vulnerable. You can feel their life slipping through your fingers, even before you touch them. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. And then, her smile widened, a grotesque parody of warmth. Then I wrapped my hands around his throat. I didn't squeeze right away. I wanted him to wake up first. I wanted him to see me. Cold shiver ran down my spine. Why did you want him to see you? Her eyes darkened. Because in that moment, I was everything. I was his entire world. His pain, his fear, his life, all of it was mine. He woke up, of course. They always do. His eyes went wide and he tried to fight, but it was useless. I pressed down, slowly, savoring every second, feeling his pulse quicken under my fingers, watching the panic set in as he realized there was no escape. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the arms of my chair, but I kept my face calm, my voice steady. And then, Emily leaned back in her chair, posture relaxed, as though we were discussing the weather. And then I watched the life drain from his eyes. It's a beautiful thing, Dr. Gardner, watching someone's last breath. There's a moment, right before they go, when they're looking at you, and they know, really know, that it's over. That they're nothing, just a speck of dust in the universe, and you're the one who decided that for them. The purest form of control. My mind struggled to process what I was hearing. She was describing a murder, in chilling, precise detail, and she wasn't hiding it. There was no remorse, no guilt, just a cold, detached pleasure. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain professional. Emily, these are serious things you're saying. You're describing a crime, a murder. Do you understand the implications of that? She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. Of course I do, Dr. Gardner. But that's the beauty of it. No one ever suspects me. I'm just another face in the crowd, just another person living their life. They don't know what I've done, what I'm capable of. I leaned forward slightly, my hands gripping the notepad tighter. And how many times have you done this? Her eyes glinted with a cold amusement. Wouldn't you like to know? A knot formed in my stomach, tightening with every word she spoke. My mind raced, trying to find a way to get through to her, understand her motives. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became. She enjoyed it. Power, the control, the fear. It wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about dominance. Emily, what you're describing, it's not normal. These feelings of control, of power, they're dangerous. You need help. He chuckled softly. Help? I don't need help, Dr. Gardner. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm very good at it. I forced myself to remain calm. I needed to get more information, needed to understand the depth of her depravity. How do you choose your victims? She leaned back, crossing her legs again. It's not about choosing. It's about finding the right moment, right person. Sometimes they come to me, other times I seek them out. But when the moment is right, I know. Her voice was so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a woman who was struggling with her actions. This was a woman who reveled in them. Do you ever feel guilty? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile faded slightly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Something cold, something dead. Why would I feel guilty? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm simply cleansing the world. The room felt colder, the air thick with the weight of her words. My pulse quickened, and for the first time in my career, I felt fear in my own office. Not the fear of a disturbed patient, the fear of a buck. Not the fear of a disturbed patient, but the fear of a predator, someone who didn't just enjoy hurting others, they craved it. I cleared my throat, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed to keep her talking, to figure out just how many people she had hurt, and more importantly, whether anyone else was in danger. Emily, when you say cleansing, what do you mean by that? I asked, trying to sound as neutral as possible. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. People like Paul, they're dirty. They clutter the world with their stupidity, their carelessness, their weakness. I don't just kill them for fun, even though it is, Dr. Gardner. I kill them because they deserve it. They need to be erased, like smudges on a window. I sat frozen in my chair, unsure of how to respond. It was clear that Emily had no moral compass. Her sense of right and wrong had twisted into something dark and unnatural. But I had to keep her engaged, had to learn more. Can you tell me about another time? I asked carefully, flipping my notepad to a fresh page. I didn't want to write anything down. My hands were trembling too much to do so anyway. But I needed to keep her talking, needed to buy time to figure out what to do next. Emily's eyes lit up as she leaned forward again, as though she were telling me about a favorite hobby. There was this woman, she began, her voice almost sing-song. Her name was Rachel. She worked in a little boutique downtown, always wearing these ridiculous high heels and smiling like the world was her runway. You know the type? I nodded slowly, though I had no idea what type of person she was talking about. I followed her for a few days, just to make sure she was the one. She was so fake, Dr. Gardner. Every smile she gave her customers, every laugh at their stupid jokes, it was all so hollow, so meaningless. It made me sick. Her eyes darkened again, and for a moment I saw the monster lurking beneath her calm facade. One night, I waited for her outside the store. She was closing up late, and there wasn't anyone else around. When she came out, I followed her to her car. She didn't even notice me. Can you believe that? So oblivious, so wrapped up in her little world that she didn't even realize she was being hunted. My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral. What happened next? Emily smiled, a small, satisfied smile that made my skin crawl. I grabbed her from behind, shoved her into the back seat of her own car. She struggled, of course, they always do, but I had a knife. She froze when she felt the blade against her throat. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, but I forced myself to stay composed. And then, Emily continued, her voice soft and almost affectionate. I told her that if she screamed, I'd slit her throat. She believed me, of course. They always do, so she didn't scream. She just whimpered, begging me to let her go, promising she wouldn't tell anyone. But it wasn't about her telling anyone, Dr. Gardner. It was about what I wanted. She paused for a moment, her gaze distant, as though reliving the memory. I made her drive. I kept the knife at her side, and I made her drive to this little spot in the woods I'd found a few weeks earlier. Secluded. Perfect. My throat tightened as I listened, every word more horrifying than the last. And when you got there, Emily's smile returned, wider and more sinister. I tied her to a tree. It wasn't easy. She fought, of course, once she realized what was happening, but I'm stronger than I look. I gagged her with a piece of cloth, then stood back to admire my work. I could barely breathe, my mind racing. I had to call the authorities, but how? How could I get out of here without setting her off? She was so pathetic, Emily continued, her voice low and cold, sobbing, shaking, pleading with her eyes. But I didn't care. I took my time, Dr. Gardner. I wanted to savor it. I wanted her to feel every second of her last moments. So, I started small. Small? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her smile fading slightly. Little cuts here and there, not deep enough to kill, just enough to make her bleed, to make her panic. She struggled, but she couldn't get free. I watched her bleed, watched the terror in her eyes as she realized no one was coming to save her. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to stay calm. And then, Emily's eyes gleamed with a sick satisfaction. And then I finished it. A single cut, right across her throat. Quick, clean. She bled out in minutes. I watched her die, watched the light leave her eyes, and when it was over, I felt complete. The room was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of her confession. My hands trembled as I gripped the arms of my chair, my mind screaming at me to get out, to run, to call the police. But I couldn't move. I was trapped in the same room as a monster. Emily, I said slowly, carefully, what you're describing, it's not normal. It's dangerous. You're hurting people, taking lives. You need help. She laughed softly, the sound chilling in its casualness. Help? Oh, Dr. Gardner, I don't need help. I'm not the one who's broken. The world is broken. I'm just doing my part to fix it. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. I had no idea how to reason with someone like her, someone so far removed from any sense of morality or empathy. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice shaky. Why now? Emily's smile faded, and for the first time since she'd entered my office, her expression turned serious. Because I trust you, Dr. Gardner. I think you understand me in a way that no one else ever has. And maybe, just maybe, you're the one I've been waiting for. My blood ran cold. Waiting for? She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been listening to me, really listening. I can see it in your eyes. You're not disgusted by me. You're fascinated. You want to understand what makes me tick, what drives me to do the things I do. And that, Dr. Gardner, makes you special. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm not like you, Emily. I don't... Shh, she interrupted, her voice soothing. You don't have to pretend. I see it in you, the same hunger for control, for power. You hide it well, but it's there, lurking beneath the surface. That's why I chose you. My breath hitched. Chose me for what? Emily's smile returned, but this time it was darker, more menacing. To be my partner, to join me in my work. Imagine the things we could do together, Dr. Gardner, the people we could cleanse, the lives we could control. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a confession. It was an invitation, an offer to step into the darkness with her. I can't, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't do that. Emily's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. You will, Dr. Gardner. You just don't know it yet. I felt a chill run down my spine as she stood up, smoothing out her dress. Our time's almost up, she said softly, glancing at the clock. But don't worry, Dr. Gardner. We'll talk again soon. She turned and walked to the door, pausing for a moment before glancing back at me. Think about what I said. You know where to find me when you're ready. And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet, suffocating stillness of my office. For a long time, I sat there, my mind spinning, my heart racing. I should have called the police, should have reported her immediately, but I didn't, because deep down, in the darkest corner of my mind, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said, and that terrified me more than anything. The shadows only deepen, as we now descend into the next terrifying encounter. Dolls don't eat. The dispatcher said 2 kids, a boy and a girl, showed up on a lady's doorstep. Lady said the kids wouldn't talk or give their names. She gave them milk and cookies and sent them to rest in her bed because they looked tired. No children had been reported missing, but it was late, so the dispatcher thought the parents didn't know their kids were gone. No problem. Not my first call about kids that walked out the front door because they wanted to play. At least it wasn't winter. I drove to the house on the outskirts of Bridal Veil Lake. It looked like another farm sold off for condos that were never built. A bunch of wild fields and dirt surrounded the lady's house. It was remote and dark, and I wondered if she felt comfortable living alone out here. That knock in the middle of the night must have been a shock. I announced my presence and knocked lightly. Hello? An old woman, the lady, answered. Hello, she said. Hello, I said again. How are you doing tonight, ma'am? Been better. They're in the bedroom. Sleeping, I think. She stepped aside to let me in. I saw 2 shapes beneath a quilt in the darkened bedroom. There was no one else? You didn't see anybody. She shook her head. Were they injured? Scared? No. Just shy. Really shy. She nodded toward the kitchen, which I could see from where I stood. Not a big house. They hardly ate. There were 2 neat piles of chocolate chip cookies beside full cups of milk. It all looked completely untouched. The sight made me antsy. She said they didn't eat much. They ate something then, but not a crumb had fallen on the table? Nuh-uh. I have 3 kids. Never saw them leave a cookie intact or at all. Something really bad must have happened with these children. Hi, kids, I said quietly from the doorway of the bedroom. I didn't want to startle them. Are you awake? No answer, but I had to check on them. There was only a lamp for the room, and it barely lit anything. 2 small shapes lay with their whole bodies and heads covered with the quilt, completely still. I'm a policeman, I said. I'm here to help you. You don't have to be scared. I waited. Still nothing. I'm going to pull off the blanket very slowly, just so you can see me, okay? Then you can put it right back if that makes you feel safe. Nothing. They didn't move a muscle. I prepared for the worst and pulled off the quilt. Their eyes were black, shiny, and lifeless. Jesus? Because these were not living children, but life-sized dolls, complete with clothing and realistic hair. Only the eyes and their plastic faces looked immediately fake. What the hell? I stomped out, admittedly pissed off. Lady waited in her living room chair. Is this a joke? Excuse me? Those aren't real kids, I said. They're dolls. She became confused. I beg your pardon? I took a breath and tried to calm down. Ma'am, are you on any medication, or... She got up and went to the bedroom. Jesus Christ, save us. I shouldn't have let her see. The lady fainted at the foot of the bed. I called it in and everyone had a good laugh about the dolls. Except me. The lady had been prescribed blood thinners and a nasal spray for seasonal allergies. Unless she did other, non-prescribed drugs, she had nothing hallucinogenic in her system. That meant she probably had a tumor or dementia. A gas leak could also be a possibility. I mulled over these details while I escorted the ambulance to the hospital. She wasn't unconscious for long, but didn't fight my suggestion to see a doctor. Thank you, she said from a stretcher, squeezing my hand, just before the paramedics wheeled her into the ER. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. It's my job to help. I followed them in. Sometimes doctors want to ask us questions. The cafeteria called to me. 4 more hours till the end of my shift. Coffee and a sandwich seemed prudent. I hardly touched them. Walkie crackled. There'd been an assault at the hospital. Obviously, I responded. Someone's been attacked, dispatch said. The nurse that called wasn't very clear, and she hung up. I got up from the table the same time a doctor descended the steps into the food court and shouted something incomprehensible. When he got close, I grabbed him by the shoulders. She's dead, the doctor said. Gone. Killed her. It took a bit to understand. I'll summarize. The old lady I'd escorted to the hospital had been murdered by another patient, a young man suffering from unmedicated schizophrenia. He'd been brought into the ER after being hit by a car. I thought he was sleeping, Doc had told me. He sat on the floor with his head in his hands. Oh God, her head. Cut off her head. Apparently, he walked down the hallway with it. Then he sat down and chatted with staff until the police arrived. I never left the food court, so I was spared the scene. Still messed me up. She thanked me. I'd sent her to her grisly death. Tragedy. That's what everyone, including my therapist, said, and I eventually agreed. I believed it. For years I didn't think about those dolls unless someone brought them up. The old woman had been suffering from some kind of delusion. No point in finding out what exactly with her gone. Probably wouldn't even be possible. Then I got another call. What? What did you just say? This dispatcher didn't know about the kids and the dolls. That was half a decade ago by this point. Can you hear me? Yes. North side. A gentleman says 2 kids showed up on his doorstep. No missing children reported tonight. Girl and a boy? Kids? I asked. Yeah, how did you know? I didn't explain. I'm on it. But send more constables, please. So many similarities to the previous tragedy. The time of year, the wrong side of midnight, and the kids gaining entry to the home. Except that hadn't happened last time. They were dolls, I reminded myself. I would go to the house in the posh side of town and find actual kids there. Then I would do my job and get them home. Fear against resolve, I gripped the steering wheel too tight and my fingers went numb. Big dead hot dog fingers trembled when I got out of the cruiser in the huge driveway. No lights were on in the mansion at the top of the hill. I'd hoped the other constables would have arrived, but I was alone again. It took me a few moments to calm down and not call dispatch for an ETA. As I approached, I could see the front door had been left slightly open. My flashlight revealed a foyer big enough to fit a house. Since there hadn't been a crime reported, I felt confident to call out to the owner. Hello? An echo replied. Place really was that big. Bridal Veil Lake PD, your front door is open, sir. I rang the doorbell and waited a bit. Nobody showed. I don't know why I didn't call dispatch or wait for the other constables. The only reason I went in, I think, was because I had to know if history was repeating. I'm coming in. The switches were dead. No power. Grand staircases wrapped the foyer in a broad embrace, and in the center, they were there, propped up before a headless storyteller. At first, I didn't understand, and I tried talking. It's going to be okay, I said, to a headless man. He'd been posed with an oversized Grimm's fairy tale book between his thigh and arm. Before each of the black-eyed dolls set up to appear as attentive children, a tall glass of milk and a bowl of chips had been placed and left untouched. I choked out a gasp. Couldn't be. Couldn't. How could the dolls be here? Attempts to draw my firearm and use my radio went about as well as you can imagine. The gun hit the marble floor and I communicated nothing of use to dispatch. Maybe that was good. I might have shot the other constables when they showed up. They found me on my knees and hysterical. Kept pointing at the dolls. They thought I meant the headless victim. "It's gonna be okay," one of them said, and it felt like I'd said it, or this constable had been cloned from my cells. Funny the places a shattered mind wanders. "Okay?" I asked. I don't remember much after that. I went to the hospital. They had to sedate me. I wouldn't stop talking about the dolls. Olive and Matthew, my therapist said. He'd come to visit and explain what had happened. "It's a terrific coincidence," he said. "Those dolls are the same, yes, from the last incident. Apparently, they didn't belong to the woman who passed." I don't know why this information horrified me. "Well, who the hell do they belong to?" I shouted. "It's all right," he said. "It's not entirely what you think." He really pissed me off. "Look, just fucking explain it then." "Right, sorry, okay. The dolls weren't known to the relatives. They claimed the lady who'd been decapitated didn't like dolls of any kind. She found them creepy. Your colleagues put them into evidence for lack of a better option. Then they were sold at auction. And the rich guy bought them?" "No," my therapist said. "Somebody did. And that person, well, they're the killer." Braid. A man was discovered in the mansion basement, covered in blood and with the head. "I thought you said it'd be all right." "The man was mentally ill," he went on, "but he bought those dolls, maybe even called about the kids. Do you see what I'm saying?" Some kind of copycat killing? He shrugged his bony shoulders in his tweed coat. "It's the only thing that makes sense. Perhaps he knew the other schizophrenic man that killed the woman who thanked me. The important thing to note is that nothing supernatural is occurring." The therapist smiled. "What? It's an unfortunate coincidence, I mean." That bullshit smile twitched. "I've been around long enough to know when someone is pulling a con. I never thought it was supernatural," I said. "Why did you say that?" Chuckled nervously. "An unfortunate choice of words. I didn't mean to imply that." "How do you know the names?" "The names?" "Of the dolls," I said, before attempting to get out of the hospital bed. Handcuffs held my wrists. The sedatives prevented this observation until the urge to punch the therapist moved my body. "What the hell is going on? Why are you telling me this? You're not from the department? What the fuck is happening?" He backed away toward the door. "Calm down. Killer named them." He kept saying the names over and over. "The inspector contacted me. She thought it best I talk to you." I agreed and... Bullshit. He suddenly went mute with his lips mouthing the words, "Help me," over and over. His eyes darted to the little window in the door. At the same time, a shadow passed across his face. Therapist shivered and sniffled back tears. "You should run," he said, his last words. All at once, the man collapsed. "What the fuck? Help! Help!" I shouted. The nurses came and did their thing, but he was gone. "He's gone?" I asked. They stopped trying to revive him. One of them confirmed it. How had he died? A real tragedy. Another unfortunate coincidence. The deceased therapist had an unknown aneurysm that just happened to trigger while he begged for help and a shadow crossed the window. Bullshit. I took his advice. After my wife picked me up from the hospital, I told her I would take early retirement. She looked relieved until I told her we needed to leave Bridal Veil Lake. I purchased a cottage up north on Oxbow Lake. My family didn't come. Who can blame them? I didn't think they were in danger until I learned everybody is and there are no safe places. It came on the third night. At first, the knocking struck too softly. I thought I imagined it. Then it became more persistent, more rapid. I didn't move from the recliner or even lower the footrest. I just watched the door and did my best not to breathe too loudly. The knocking continued with desperate urgency. Then tiny fingernails scratched at the door. Soft weeping followed that. Child for sure. I could no longer be idle. I went to the window and peeked through the curtains. The expected pair, Olive and Matthew, wept in the gloom of the stoop. They weren't dolls. They were kids. Flesh, blood, and human. I relented and opened the door. The very images of the dolls looked up to me. Misery and fatigue had captured the innocence from their faces. I know what an overtired child looks like. This wasn't that. The little boy and girl hadn't rested in days. They swayed on their feet, avoiding collapse by way of fear of something greater. I just didn't know that yet. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or whatever shit this was supposed to be. I hadn't been drinking anything but pop, and there were no gas leaks in the cottage, or the monoxide detectors would be going off. Kids were real, and they were scared. So was I. I grabbed their arms and basically tossed them behind me and into the living room. So dark on Oxbow Lake, a million places to hide. I shut the door and threw the bolt. Olive and Matthew clutched one another by the recliner. "What's going on?" I asked. "Who are you? How did you get here?" They stared, but not at me or anything. Both were underweight and filthy. A combination of urine and stale sweat emanated from their simple clothes. "Go to the couch," I said. "Lie down." Completely aware of the pattern I was fulfilling, I went to the kitchen and grabbed some apples and cheese. I set it down on the coffee table. "Eat," I said. Neither would look at the food. "Eat," I said, louder. They had to eat. It felt crucial. If they ate, then they were real, because the food would be gone, and that seemed like tangible proof of their existence. Olive yawned. Matthew's expression contorted with scorn while his bottom lip trembled. He seemed angry with her. She looked ashamed. Both started to cry again. "What the hell happened to you?" I dialed 911 and went through the process of summoning the police. The dispatcher thought I was crazy when I demanded a severe response. "You'll be lucky to see a constable within an hour, sir," she said. "You're so far away." I couldn't argue with that, but tried anyway. "I'll be dead before that. Something isn't right." I told her about the dolls and my time with BVLP. She listened intently because of her training. Talking was good. Talking meant life and focus off of whatever she might believe I could be capable of. The call hadn't gone well, in other words. I'd simply cast myself as a crazy, possibly dangerous suspect. I hung up. Maybe they'd get here fast because of the kids. Maybe I'd be beheaded long before a hope of rescue. Kids leaned into the cushions, closed their eyes, and immediately fell asleep. No bites had been taken from the food. I got my gun from the bedroom. When I returned, the dolls were beside them. All four could be mistaken for sleeping children. A tall, disheveled man stood by the peeled screen of the open window. Only his fingernails, bitten and jagged, caught the edge of the lamplight. Shadowed lips muttered gibberish at first, but then his word became clear. "Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat." I aimed. He lunged. I fired. He staggered, but not before wrapping his large hands around the barrel of my gun. I put another bullet through him, and yet he didn't fall. With surprising strength, he smacked me across the face. I dropped the gun. He retrieved it, and somehow our positions in the living room were reversed. He stood near the couch. The real kids had run away. Only their simulacrums remained. I stood near the expertly sliced screen of the front window. The man's narrow head resembled a crescent moon. He appeared confused by the blood exiting his body as he struggled to level the gun. I wasn't about to wait around for him to figure it out. I leapt through the open window as a bullet shattered the glass above my head. My ass hit dirt and I tore off into the pitch of the forest, figuring I'd hide somewhere until the police arrived, and for a while that worked. I lay in the midst of some thorny brush, scratched me up good, until time enough said that man had to be dead from blood loss. I endured the escape from the brambles, crawling until something firm pressed between my shoulder blade. "There you are," said a voice, impossibly calm and smooth. "Don't move. I have you. The blade is sharp, and I have done this before." I did as he said, and remained as still as my fear would allow. "Of course, you understand something about it now?" When I remained silent, he ordered an answer, punctuating the request with the tip of his knife. "You make them knock on doors in the night. They're supposed to be like dolls? And if they're not, then the kind caretakers have to die," he finished. "Olive and Matthew must become the same as their dolls. Exactly the same." "Why?" The knife point penetrated slightly. "That's not for you to know. We're only here because of bad luck. You happened upon 2 instances of their training. They were so little that first time. They're older now, but don't look it. We don't let them grow much." "You cut off that woman's head in the hospital," I accused. The knife pressure relaxed slightly. "Perhaps I was wrong, and you don't get it. But then I did. and resumed tension forced me to reveal everything. You didn't kill that woman, you didn't kill the rich guy, and you weren't going to kill me. The moon-face guy had been a ringer for murder, just like the other two. Where did he find so many mentally ill people to take the fall? He'd need access. He'd have to be a doctor of some kind, or a therapist. You're alive, I said. You didn't die in the hospital. No aneurysm. How is that possible? The nurses? The therapist laughed. Elementary, my dear Watson. I made up a story for the nurses. Told them you were dangerous and obsessed with me. I needed to cut contact with you, and, while certainly dramatic, they were all too willing to help out a colleague. You wanted me to go far away, I said. I hoped you would. Never thought you'd be so dense as to choose yet another perfectly isolated location for me to work. You would have been much safer in your home. I was too scared to feel stupid. Now we're going back in to see Olive and Matthew, I said. My poor slave is likely dead, so it's my turn to cut, and that's fine. I'm out of practice and there's no need to rush. Why let the victims contact the police? The children have to see that no one can help them. They are mine. Makes it more fun too. But why the dolls? You're leaving a trail. He snickered. Less than breadcrumbs. Only you've connected 2 of the scenes, and I've left dozens over the years. Granted, the last one was dramatic. I couldn't help myself. I wanted Olive and Matthew to see what happens to good people when they disappoint me. I thought of Olive's yawn and how hungry they must always be. One of them ate. The knife pierced my skin and I gasped and writhed. Dolls, he seethed. Don't eat. Now get up. Up into the house, and the distant thrum of an engine filled the otherwise perfect quiet of the lake. Noise travels easily across water, so he waited and listened. When it became clear a vehicle approached, he drew in a sharp breath and exhaled slowly, calming himself. Well, someone's coming. It happens. Are you going to kill me? The pressure of the knife tip evaporated like the presence of the psychopathic therapist. I leapt to my feet and threw a wild punch in the dark. Nothing but air swept over my knuckles. Coward, I said. I won't keep quiet. I'm not afraid. I lied, badly. I'll find you. I'll find those kids. You hear that? I'm coming, Olive. Matthew. He chuckled, already some indeterminate distance away. Good luck. Tell anyone you think cares or will believe you. Headlights bounced down the narrow dirt road. The front door of the cottage opened and filled with the therapist. I screamed and rushed him and realized my next mistake too late. The man wasn't the therapist, but an off-duty park warden, keenly aware of his surroundings and the clumsy charge of an old wounded cop. He flipped me with some kind of judo. I landed across the coffee table, on the untouched food, facing the black-eyed dolls. A pair of cuffs came next. I ranted about the dolls and the therapist and the children to no avail. They found the moon-faced martyr crouched by the broken window. Even dead, still appeared confused. The warden used his cell to call for more support. The dispatcher had only called him because she knew he lived near Oxbow Lake. I told the story so many times and begged them to look for the therapist and those kids. Hours later, someone must have called him because they came back with another unfavorable fabrication. The therapist had never left Bridalveil Lake and answered the call from Huntsville Police on the landline of his office. He drove back, I said. Huntsville and Oxbow Lake is roughly 5 hours away from Bridalveil Lake. I'd been questioned for 6. He also told us about your condition. I laughed. Sure, of course. But what about the break-in and the dolls? Constables looked at one another. We asked about that. He said it's possible, perhaps even likely given your trauma, that you took those dolls from evidence. That's where they were after your last discovery. You had access and a reason to dwell on them. A reason. They were choosing their words carefully. What about the intruder? He's local, an addict, really ill. He's been arrested for breaking into cottages before, but usually goes for empty ones. He just moved to Oxbow. Even with lights on and a vehicle out front, he probably didn't understand it was occupied. You surprised him. I surprised him, I asked, incredulously. After many more protests, I was released and told to be grateful. An investigation would follow, of course, but no charges laid unless something more incriminating was found. It won't be, I said bitterly. The constable walking me out of the Huntsville station just shook his head and walked away. Man doesn't know how lucky he is. Before I could object, the doors shut. I packed my shit and raced home. I didn't have my gun, of course, but figured he wouldn't be armed at his office. He was, I'd be with that knife. In a fair fight, I'd take it and cut his damn head off. Ignoring the protests of his secretary and the man seated in his treatment room, I found him. He appeared alarmed, scared. "Are you? What's the matter?" "What?" I scoffed. "Didn't expect to see me again?" I moved closer to his desk, and he stood up before backing away to the large window. "We were on the 5th floor of the building. Where are they?" I braced my foot against his desk and pushed it slowly until his legs were trapped against the sill. "Olive, Matthew." "I don't." He yelped when I pushed harder. "I swear, the police in Huntsville, they called. I understand something happened up there, but I can assure you, you died in the hospital," I seethed, "right in front of me." He looked to the other man in the room, his patient. "I didn't visit you in the hospital. I'm not dead. Your PTSD must have caused a psychotic break and..." "Liar." We argued more, but then the BVLP showed up, and I was strongly encouraged to leave, which I did. I refrained from telling him this isn't over because I'd be arrested. He knew anyway. He counted on it. I went home next and tried to talk to my wife and family. He'd called them first and told them to be careful and call the police if I began behaving erratically. My story, of course, fell into that category. "You can't stay here," my wife said, and it hurt to know she couldn't believe me and never would. I left without argument. He found me later in the park at night. The nervous demeanor had been left behind for his patients and the rest of the world. He lit a cigarette and asked if I wanted one. "You son of a bitch," I said. He exhaled a plume into the air. "So now you understand how I'm about to kill you?" "Sure, I had nothing to lose. They're dead if I am," he said, completely calm. Seems like I'd be doing them a favor. Pulled a small pistol from his coat. "No one would be surprised I carried this and shot a crazed attacker. What the fuck do you want?" I had nothing left to give him or anyone. No one gets away. They have to know. "So you're going to kill me?" "Eventually, yes, I will come, and we'll finish what we started. They'll knock in the night, and you'll answer the door, let them in, and offer them food, which they won't eat." Nodded. "As they're dolls. If they're not by then," he said, "then it'll be over. I'll find others, and I think they'll do fine. Tell me why you're doing this. I'm as good as dead anyway." He held his cigarette in clenched teeth when he smiled. "You'd be shocked how much one will pay for a doll of mine." "Quite shocked indeed." "That's not why you do this," I said. Not enough of me remained to shed a tear. I felt hollow, dead already. I couldn't be shocked anymore. When they knocked, I would open that door. I would try to help them, though it seemed futile and failure so certain. He backed away until confident I wouldn't follow. I stayed in the park the rest of the night, but moved into the motel where I currently live the next day. Now I wait. I typed this all out and put it here, so maybe, when I'm gone, when I'm headless, someone will look for those poor kids and give them something to eat. This is my last low hope. Thank you. One nightmare fades, but another one is waiting, and this one will haunt your dreams. I am a vampire. I met something more frightening than me. You and I are the same. We're both so bloodthirsty. In fact, if you asked my departed mother, you are so much worse. You, human, do not like blood as we do. Vampires sip the blood of man and beast for sustenance. My mother said you draw the blood of every creature because it excites you. My mother said that even those who faint at the sight of blood are hardwired to love it. Your desire just overcomes you. My mother said, you all will be the last species left on this planet because you are the cruelest. My mother said, across the millennia, it has not been good enough for us to bow to you, but we must be buried beneath you. I cannot even find peace in this cave. My mother said, you have slain the Neanderthal, the Jinn, the Denisovans, the Paranthropus, Homo erectus, and even the vampire. That is what I was told for the first 100 years of my life, and I still don't know what to believe. To be honest, I didn't care about any of that at the time. My mother lost my focus as she spoke as soon as she said both she and I would be dead soon. I had lived as a homeschooled child in a small cave, not knowing anything about the world for 100 years. She said she was on her last leg of life, and I only had 40 or so years left despite my teenage look. She died that month. Soon. In vampire terms, I was going to be dead. Before that, I wanted to live. I wanted to party. I've never tasted human blood, and I would never be interested in it. There were songs to dance to, and women to love. Why were we sitting in caves whining? I flew to the closest city and started my adventure. Then, after failing in that city because I did not understand it, I was homeschooled, remember? I went to a different city where things were much better. I learned to trust humans along the way. All thanks to my best friends Kathleen and Bari. I want to tell you I became their friends over mutual interest, or something noble, but that's a lie, and I will not lie on my deathbed. I met the girls when I was on a tier, going to a club or bar every night and waking up beside something pretty every morning. The hookups weren't important. Just bodies for lust, adoration, romance, and memories for a couple of hours, and then a bill for Uber in the morning. The night I ran into the girls, something was different. Kathleen sipped a blue drink and saw me coming. She tapped Bari, a girl who never understood subtlety, and Bari stared at my approach like a child does a new adult. Drunk and horny, I sat beside Kath. Embarrassed easily, her face went red, almost the same color as her pink dress. "Hey," I said. "Hey," Kathleen said, and then I vomited everything I had drunk in the last hour. The rainbow mix exhausted me, and I almost fell out of my chair. Kathleen grabbed me before I could, and Bari helped steady me. Everything went blurry. I was blackout by this point, so this is just what I was told. "Oh no," Bari said. "Are you okay?" "Ah, man." A bouncer came by and grabbed me by the shoulder. "I'll get this guy out of here. Sorry, he's bothering you." "No. Actually, he's our friend," Kathleen interjected. Now, why would this girl lie to protect a stranger? She said she felt bad for me, but after getting to know her better, I know that isn't the whole truth. Kathleen was a girl desperate to find Mr. Right. This was her greatest ambition. Now, when I vomited on her shoes, she knew I was not Mr. Right. The thing is, Kathleen had vomited on a shoe or two herself. She didn't even drink. She was that nervous. Growing up fat, a stutter, and bad skin, guys weren't the nicest to Kathleen. Extreme diet and exercise, speech therapy, and puberty changed who she was on the outside. The years of rejection and bullying did a number on her. She was a nervous wreck around men she liked. Her constant failures only made her want true love more. Like Harvard graduates lusted for political power, Kathleen lusted for love. Her lust for love caused her to be a nervous wreck when the opportunity approached. Her stutter returned, and she would tell jokes that weren't funny, and she brought an air of anxiety to the interaction. So when she saw a boy stumble over trying to introduce himself, she saw a little of me in her. Kathleen and Bari brought me over to a couch. They sat me down, and Kathleen went to get me some water, so it was just Bari and I. Now, this is the part where I start remembering again because I thought Bari's question was so strange it almost sobered me. "Did you mean to do that?" Bari asked with genuine sincerity. "What? No?" Now, one thing you should know about Bari is that she might not have any idea about what's going on at any given time. It's interesting because she wasn't dumb either. She was accepted to an Ivy League school, but turned it down to go to a school closer to her family. Bari just had gaps in her wide array of knowledge. I was homeschooled in a cave. I could relate. "Oh, sorry, she said. "I just know guys have pickup lines and stuff. You guys can be real tricky." She said tricky in what I'm sure she felt was a funny accent. It was cringy. I didn't say anything. My head was spinning. "Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that you were tricky." She patted my back twice. "I'm sure you're a nice guy." I looked at her and was greeted by the most unorthodox, unpracticed, and genuine smile I had ever seen in a club or anywhere in my life. Now, one thing you should know about Bari is that because she had trouble not offending people and understanding people, what she really wanted was to be understood and to be good. She was a part of about 5 different volunteer teams, a consistent church attendee, and was a big sister in one of those at-risk youth programs. As for being understood, she was a constant over-explainer. They were flawed, silly people, and I loved them for it. For the first time since I walked into the human world, I realized I had found some humans I wanted to be friends with. And that's how our year-long friendship began. A rainbow of impulse and chasing after what we want. I traded sex for friendship that night and never regretted it. It was easy. The girls were a lot like me. All they wanted was to have a good time before their first year of college. So there was no sex but secrets shared. The only thing naked between us was the truth, and we were bound by trust, not fuzzy handcuffed. And I wouldn't take back that experience for the world. There was another who did not like it, though. Perhaps we all are slaves to our genetics. You know, elephants hate lions and will chase a lion down to ruin its day. The same goes for whales and orcas. There was something from the ancient world that was a proud slave to its genes. We clubbed every weekend night, and songs steered our summer. In July, we were singing our hearts out to Chapel Ronan's best song. Not Pink Pony Club, not Good Luck Babe, but Feminomen hit like Rom Pom Pom Pom. Get it hot like Papa John. As soon as we entered a club, we went straight to the dance floor and earned our drinks through sweat and laugh. After that, we headed to the bar to grab drinks and then decided who would wing for who in the search for love. That night, Bari and I left Kathleen at the bar so Bari could wingwoman for me. While we were away, an old man came up to Kathleen. Much to her chagrin, she always attracted men outside her age range. I don't remember what the girl I liked was wearing. Bari wore a bright yellow dress and had just re-dyed her hair to be blonde. "Oh, you like movies," Bari said to my target for the night after awkward introduction and conversation. "Vlad really likes movies," Bari said again without a hint of subtlety. In truth, she wasn't a good wingwoman at all, but that was the fun of it. That's what made all of us laugh. "Oh," the woman said, probably surprised by Bari's abrasive approach. "Do you have a favorite director?" I asked. "I don't know. I like horror." She was nervous. Her drink swayed ever so slightly in her hand. "Oh, I saw Get Out recently. It's my favorite movie, so I guess Peele." "You like Get Out better than Peele's other one?" "US?" I asked. "Yeah. Pretty eyes and that little smile you do, and blessed with good movie taste." I didn't know God played favorites. I mocked and flashed my smile, and thanks to thousands of years of vampire genetics, I'm told it is quite good. She rolled her eyes, but she did do that little smile I liked. My heart raced because I knew what this could lead to. Behind us, the old man still chatted with Kathleen. He was out of place for the EDM club we were in. He wore a plaid suit and loafers. The room glowed under the lights of the dance floor. Neon, orange, yellow, and pink painted the club. Dresses, tank tops, and white sneakers flowed throughout the room. This was a place for drugs, dancing, and laughter. What did this old man want? I am protective of my friends, but Kathleen knew how to get rid of him. She was just taking longer than normal. "Whatever," the nameless girl in front of me said. "What about you? Who do you like?" "The only one better than Peele right now, Robert Eggers." "Ooh, he is good," Bari chimed in. "Better than Peele? Lie again." She mocked. "You think I'm wrong?" I pretended to be aghast and put my hand to my chest in protest. "I know you're wrong. Jordan Peele didn't make The Witch." Countered. "Well, he didn't," she said and fingered my chest. "You're right about God playing favorites because he definitely made you cute, but gave you bad taste." Her touch and her teasing sent me into boyish ecstasy, and she knew it. My toes curled, and I fought back a larger smile that wanted to greet her. "Oh," she said, "it looks like you have a cute little smile too." That would have sent me over the moon until Bari chimed in. "I liked The Witch," Bari added, not understanding at all that I was doing quite fine without her there. We both stared at her. She took 2 big sips of her fruity drink without a care in the world. "Shall we dance?" I asked the trio. "Eek, let's go," Bari squealed. My film buff flirt shrugged and motioned for me to lead her. I did, and looked back one more time at Kathleen and considered breaking it up. The last time I did, she got mad at me because she said he was offering to be her sugar daddy, and she was toying with the idea if she should get one. Maybe she finally decided on it. Regardless, we got to the dance floor. I am not a good dancer, but more importantly, I am a free man. I'm not afraid to be offbeat or a fool. I will do what my body tells me to do, or jump and sing the lyrics. On the 3rd song, since we were on the dance floor, that's what I was doing. I jumped, screamed, and sang in front of my girl's face, and she did it right back. "Gimme, gimme, gimme. A man after midnight. Won't somebody come chase the shadow away?" Yes, it was effeminate. Yes, it was corny, but like I said, I was free. I was having a great time. The girl I flirted with wiggled her finger at me to come closer. I pulled my new friend close to me for her to whisper something in my ear, purely for intimacy. "That's not your girlfriend, right?" she asked. "Why?" "Jealous," I asked. It was my turn to mock. "Maybe. I just wanted to give you a little film education at my place, because I have such good taste." "Why, yes, I would like a taste." She gave me a playful smack on the cheek and pushed me off. "That is not what I said. Sorry, the music is just so loud. It's difficult to hear. Can you say it again?" I said and stared at her lips, unashamed and making it clear what I wanted to do. She bit her lip and glanced at me. "Come here again and I'll show you." She puckered up. I touched the small of her back and pulled her in. She put her 2 fingers on each side of my belt buckle and returned my embrace. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the old man in plaid grab Kathleen's wrist and pull her out of the chair. Kathleen and I made eye contact across the bar. Her eyes bulged and puffed with fear and tears that I would not stand for. I brushed my date aside and moved with the speed and strength that vampiric blood allowed me. Men dropped as I went through them. The floor of flashing lights and colorful shirts parted like the Red Sea, and soon I placed my hand on the back of the man in plaid. A mighty push would be enough. He would fly across the room, crash against the wall, and receive a broken body as punishment. That's what should have happened. Instead, he received the brunt of my power and only stumbled a few feet. He turned to me, his little head full of joy. "Oh, you are from the old world too. I smell the old blood on you." His voice was curling. It was like every word was yanked uphill, going higher in pitch at the end. I was stunned into silence. I helped Kathleen up, but didn't take my eye off the plaid man. It frightened me. No one should be this strong. "Oh, she belongs to you. If I had known, oh, if I had known. I have much gold and a few souls. I will buy her. Name your price." "Not for sale," I said. I had never met another non-human who wasn't a vampire before, and I was not enjoying the experience. "Oh, everything is. Not her." Bari came behind me and added, "Yeah, not her." Then gave Kathleen a long list of eternal sorrows for leaving her. "Yes, her," the strange man said. "Yes, her indeed, and the pitiful one as well." I said no. "My dear son of the Count, do you know I am dying? Do you know what you do to me? You saying no, your resistance, your protection, it only makes me want them more. Are you aware, because I have lived 1,000 years, I have had everything I want? All that is left is what you want. Now, name your price, because everything has one." A bouncer came from around the corner and tapped the odd man on the shoulder. "Sir, you need to leave." He eyed the bouncer. All 4 foot of him eyed the 6-foot-plus giant. "No," he said. "I'm negotiating. Don't interrupt an elf as he negotiates." "Okay, let me walk you out," bouncer said. With speed much faster than me, the elf grasped the leg of the bouncer, buried his hand in there, and yanked out dripping red bone. The bouncer screamed and collapsed to the floor. "How will you do that with no legs?" the elf asked, and then turned to me. He wiggled the bone in his hand and said, "Now we were negotiating." He had to see it in my face. He had to see the fear. That was a lot of strength. Too much strength. I tried to reply back, but my throat went dry. He could talk, though. He was unmoved as everyone in the club ran out screaming upon the bouncer's crawling body, trying to make it to an exit. I somehow found words and mumbled my reply. "Is that a number?" "Go on, speak up." "They aren't mine to sell," I said, scared like a child trying to get an adult to leave him alone. "What do you mean, son of the Count? Have you not made them your slaves?" "No, they're my friends." "Then I will take them." His eyes gleamed with a sickening delight as he tossed the bloody bone aside. I never heard it clatter to the floor. Screams, the bouncer's gurgling, and the bass of the speakers drowned it out. Fear didn't let me move from my place. The elf's eyes gleamed with a primal hunger, and his body shook with wanting. He stopped looking at me and eyed Bari and Kathleen. Kathleen trembled behind me. Her fingers clutched my arm, her nails dug into my skin. Bari stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. For once she had nothing to say. If it was just my life on the line, I would have left. I am not a fighter. I'm a lover. Unfortunately, it was not just my life on the line. Despite my fear, shaking, and doubt, I dove forward. I leaped to him with a punch that could shatter bones, but the elf merely staggered, a twisted smile still plastered on his face. He moved with a fluidity that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. his every step calculated, predatory. Without warning, he lunged at me, faster than I could react. I barely had time to raise my arms in defense before he was upon me. His strength overwhelmed me. We crashed into the dance floor. The impact shattered it. My back burned. My head bounced against the floor. Neon lights flickered and flashed above us to match the quick, violent tempo of the song. I really thought I was going to die. His hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing with the force of a vice. I thrashed beneath him, clawing at his arms, but it was like trying to move a mountain. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," he said. "I am your brother here. You cannot befriend them. You must rule them, or they will betray you. I beg you, yield." "No," I spat back. "Then you will be made to yield," he said, and grabbed my thigh with one hand and pulled out a bone. I howled. I cried. I was confused, and I was so angry. "It's for your own good, son of the Count. These girls." He stopped his speech as both Barry and Kathleen crashed bottles against his head. They did not affect him. He swatted them away. I managed to free one hand. I unsheathed my nails and slashed them across his face. It loosened his grip. I broke free. "I guess I deserve that," the elf said, unamused. "We can be done with this, boy. Again, I just ask you for your women." He rose and extended his arm to me. Something snapped inside me. With a primal scream, I launched myself at the elf, sinking my fangs into his face. He howled in pain and I chewed. I chewed like a mad dog and ripped out every piece of humanity from his flesh. The taste of his blood was foul, like poison, but I didn't care. I bit down harder. My anger gave me strength. The elf tried to shake me off, but I held on and tore at his flesh with all the fury I could muster. Eventually, I got off of him and stood above him on my one working leg. Crawled away on his back, like a worm. His nose was gone. I had swallowed an eye, and his face was more bone than meat. I felt a gross satisfaction with myself. You. He stuttered and sputtered his words. He only had one lip to speak with now, and part of his tongue was torn. "You would do this to another elder species for them? You have stolen an elf's face for what? Do you know what they are?" "They are friends," I said. "Both Kathleen and Barry helped me up." "Oh, this, you betray your blood for humanity. They will betray you, you know? You see me as an enemy, but one day you will look at me as a friend. Wait until you meet my friends." And with that, he ran away. Just when you think it's safe, the true horror begins. Brace yourself for this next story. I found a nightmare journal in an abandoned house. My Uncle Joe was a house flipper. He bought distressed or abandoned houses and fixed them up and sold them for a profit. He'd done this for years, and he was pretty good at it. Sometimes I helped him out. It's a decent way to make a few bucks over the summer, and I got to hang out with my uncle. It was hard work, but at least it wasn't something soul-destroying like fast food or a call center. We'd found some pretty wild things in the houses he bought. Once we found a fully functioning still in the basement of an old hunting lodge, along with about 20 bottles of moonshine. One time we found these little weird clay statues, about 50 of them, all around an old ranch house that used to be an artist's commune. Of course, we also found the usual stuff you see in an old house. Lots of abandoned family picture albums, broken plastic toys, decaying furniture. All of it has to be tossed out. Sometimes I think about these people and the stuff they left behind. A lot of it came from people who died with no family. But other times I can't help but wonder what the story was. One time we found this huge painted portrait of a little girl, about 6 or so. Must have cost a fortune. The bottom was a plaque that read, "Rest in peace, Maggie 1967-1974. I wonder what happened to Maggie. I wonder what happened to her family that they would leave this painting behind. I felt so bad throwing it in the roll-off dumpster. Felt irreverent or disrespectful. I felt like I was throwing away something precious. All of the things that have meaning to use will end up as somebody else's junk. Out of all the things I found while I worked for my uncle, I never kept anything. Except once. We were working on a split level out in the county that was already in decent shape. It just needed a pretty good cleaning, coat of paint, and some new carpet. The only furniture left inside was an old broken cabinet-style TV and a roll-top desk. Inside the desk was an old leather-bound journal, the hardback kind people used to use as a diary ages ago. Someone had written on the cover, in big block letters, "Nightmare Journal," When I opened it up, I found pages upon pages of someone's nightmares they had written down. This was a solid 100 pages, front and back, dense, neat handwriting. Hundreds upon hundreds of entries, each one dated, except for the first, which read, "My name is Adam. This is going to be my nightmare journal. The shrink says this might help, but I don't know. I'm also not supposed to call him a shrink. I'm willing to try anything at this point." I don't know why, but I had to take it. I couldn't explain it. I felt bad about it at first. I tried to lie to myself that if it was something important, they would have taken it with them. But the truth is, this is somebody's private misery that I had no right to poke my nose into. But I couldn't resist. I've had the journal for quite a few years now. I've thought long and hard about this, and I want to share some of these entries. The journal was old even when I found it, and I don't think it'll do any harm. Most of the journal is made up of short, 2 or 3 sentence entry. Some are a couple of paragraphs. Some are several pages long and insanely detailed and descriptive. This is an entry from near the beginning of the journal. 14th July. It wouldn't be hell if it wasn't forever. The pale man says, standing over me. He shouldn't be able to speak. He has no mouth, no face, just a round, jagged hole filled with sharp chunks of bone and raw flesh. He holds an old oil lamp that smokes and flickers. He holds it in a hand that ends not in fingers, but raw stumps of bone. In his other hand is something like a staff, covered in pulsating veins. He is dressed in rags and smells faintly of ashes. I stagger to my feet. I am cold, naked, and drenched in sweat. The only thing I can feel is fear. It coils in my guts like a snake made of ice. It overwhelms me. I have never been this afraid. I try to speak. The sound dies in my throat. What comes out of my mouth reminds me of a lamb being slaughtered. An animal sound, like a panicked bleating. I am surrounded by dimly lit dead trees and the smell of decay. The black flagstones I stand on are moss-covered and slick. They form a rough path that leads into the darkness. I have to get away, so I do the only thing I can. I run. I run and leave the pale man and his smoky oil lantern that smells faintly of burning meat and something worse. I run into the darkness, into a tunnel of dead trees. My way is lit by a pale light in sky that I cannot see. I slow my pace and try to look up, but my body refuses to obey. I know in my heart that the source of this silver light is the worst thing I can possibly imagine. I know if I look directly into that wan glow, it will be the end. It will be terror beyond imagining. So I lower my gaze and keep running. All I can do. I run for hours, possibly days. There is no time here. There is only the overwhelming fear and the darkness and cold, stale air and the need to get away. The trees thin out and the flagstones give way to sand and gravel. I keep running. The sand gives way to hard-packed dry dirt and dead brush. I keep running. My feet ache and burn. They are raw and bleeding. The pain is intense and sharp, like the jagged edge of a broken diamond digging into the nerves of my feet. I keep running. In the distance is a mound, possibly a hill. It is the only thing for miles around besides the occasional dead bush or small jagged rock. The top of the hill glows with a warm red light. It is warm and welcoming, the color of a faded rose. As I get closer, I see it's not a hill, some kind of pyramid. There are steps on the side, like the pyramids in South America. I ascend the steps slowly, with reverence. I am supposed to be here, and leave bloody footprints in my wake. On the top of the pyramid is a wide, flat terrace with a squat, square throne made of black stone. On the throne sits the pale man. Before me is a glowing pit made of brick giving way to an awful pink flesh, a never-ending mouth sucking and chewing. The pale man gestures and my knees give out. I fall in. I fall, and as I fall, I look up at the sky and see that silver light, the moonlight glow. It is an eye, a vast and infinite eye filled with incomprehensible sadness and wisdom. It looks at me, and though me, it sees every part of me, then it turns away. I'm being torn apart. My hands and feet are gone. I feel every microsecond of them being ripped away. Then my arms and legs. I am coming apart. I am a torso. I am only a shed. I am a single mote of dust in a black hurricane. The wind blows through me, and around me, and inside of me, and out of me. I am nothing. The world spins, and I wake, laying on black moss-covered flagstones. It wouldn't be hell if it wasn't forever. The pale man says, standing over me. I wake up screaming. This was a really bad one. I need more sleeping pills. And that's the first entry that really shook me. I'll post more if you guys want. It's mainly the longer ones that are interesting, but I may post some of the shorter ones as well. One mystery solved, but another door opens. And what lies behind it is pure fear. It wasn't just an episode of sleep paralysis. I've had sleep paralysis before. If you've never experienced it, count yourself lucky. It's terrifying. You wake up, but your body won't move. You're frozen, stuck inside your own head, helpless. Usually, it comes with hallucinations. Shadows creeping along the walls, whispers just outside your hearing. But at least, I always thought it's all in my head. Last night, I learned I was wrong. It started like any other sleep paralysis episode. I woke up, and immediately, I knew I couldn't move. My room was dark, the familiar sense of dread creeping over me. I told myself it was fine, that it would pass, just like every other time. I couldn't even blink, but I could see the faint outline of my room, the dresser, the chair by the window, the door slightly opened. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping was followed by a faint rustling sound, barely noticeable. Then it grew louder and closer. My eyes were struggling to make out shapes in the dark, and that's when I saw it. A hand, pale and thin, sliding out from under my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, but I still couldn't move. It was just a hallucination, I thought, repeating it over and over like a mantra. It wasn't real, except the hand was still there. Long, bony fingers wrapped around the edge of my bed frame, followed by an arm and then a head. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, unable to move as it got closer. It felt real, too real. It wasn't a shadowy figure like I'd seen in previous episodes. It was something else. The figure's skin was grayish, almost translucent, eyes too wide, too black. The gray figure crawled slowly, pulling itself out from under my bed. Things stopped at the side of my bed, its face inches from mine. Breath was cold, and I could smell something foul, like rotting meat. It watched me for what felt like hours. I couldn't do anything but stare back, tears streaming down my face. Then something changed. It smiled. The smile was grotesque, stretching far beyond what any human mouth should. Its lips cracked as they curled up, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth, almost glowing in the dark. Corners of its mouth twitched, as if it was straining to hold the expression, forcing its face into this grotesque display of joy. The longer I stared, the wider its smile grew, until it took over its entire face, pulling the skin tight and exposing dark, empty gums beneath. Slowly, it reached out a hand. As its hand crept toward me, I could hear each knuckle cracking faintly as its pale, bony fingers extended. The skin, mottled and slick with a thin sheen of moisture, looking like a piece of meat left out in the cold for too long. Gray, clammy, and shriveled. When it touched my cheek, its fingers felt like ice-cold leather, damp and unsettling. The chill seeped into my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. The moment its touch registered, a violent shock jolted through me, snapping me out of the paralysis. It moved. I gasped, jerking upright in bed. I scrambled back against the headboard, my chest rising and falling in uneven breath. My eyes darted around the room, wide with panic, until I realized something. It was gone. The room was silent, no sign of the creature, no sound, no movement. I sat there for hours, afraid to even breathe, my eyes locked on the space beneath my bed. Still, nothing came. I didn't sleep again that night. Today, as I am writing this, I tried convincing myself it was just another episode of sleep paralysis. Just my mind playing tricks on me. But when I got home from work, something I felt as if something was off. I don't know how to describe it, but the air felt colder, heavier, like the temperature had dropped drastically in one moment to the other. The atmosphere in the house seemed denser, almost as if the very space was thick with an oppressive weight that was pressing down on me. I couldn't ignore it. Something came over me. I had a feeling, this urge to check my room, almost like a magnetic pull, as if a part of me knew something was waiting there, something that needed to be known. It was a relentless feeling, gnawing at my mind, driving me to confront whatever I had hoped was just a figment of my imagination. I should have known better, but despite every rational thought telling me to stay away, to turn around, I just couldn't. This overwhelming urge that I had to see it for myself pulled me closer toward my bedroom. And there it was, a single, long, gray finger resting on the floor, waiting for me to find it. Hold your breath because the next story is not for the faint of heart. As we leave the shadows of that chilling tale, let's venture into another realm where darkness has its own story to tell. The Ring doorbell. A few weeks ago, I bought a Ring camera for my front door. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and I never thought I'd need it. The only reason I installed it was because of a recent string of break-ins nearby. I figured having some peace of mind wouldn't hurt. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. The camera picked up the occasional stray cat or delivery truck, but nothing out of the ordinary. That all changed last night. At around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected at your front door. Half asleep, I figured it was a passing car or a raccoon. I've had false alarms before, so I didn't think much of it. I swiped open the app, expecting to see nothing but an empty porch or maybe the neighborhood cat wandering around. Instead, I saw me. Standing on my front porch, facing directly into the camera, was someone who looked exactly like me. They were wearing the same clothes I had on that night. Gray sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. Same messy hair, same tired look on their face. I blinked a few times, trying to shake the grogginess and make sense of what I was seeing. I'm inside my house, in my bed. There I was, staring at myself on the screen. First, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe the camera had picked up a reflection, or maybe it was delayed footage of me going outside earlier. But I hadn't been outside all night, and the more I stared, the more I realized something was off. Figure on the screen wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring directly into the camera, watching, like it was waiting. I watched for a minute, my heart racing, expecting the figure to move, to do something. But it didn't. It remained completely still, like a mannequin. It didn't even blink. I thought about getting up and checking the door, but the idea of confronting that thing, or whatever it was, made my skin crawl. So instead, I just watched, phone clutched in my shaking hands, heart pounding in my ears. The camera feed stayed live the entire time, no glitch, no interruption. The figure never moved an inch. After about 5 minutes, I finally worked up the nerve to check the timestamp on the footage. 3:04 a.m. I watched for another minute, but nothing changed. Still, I stayed glued to the screen, waiting for the figure to leave. It didn't. By 3:15, I was losing my nerve. What the hell was going on? Clicked out of the app and sat there, sweating and wide awake. It took all my willpower not to immediately pack up and drive to a friend's house, but a part of me was convinced it was some elaborate prank, something explainable. When I finally mustered the courage to open the app again, the camera was back to its normal empty view. No figure, no one standing there. It was like it had vanished the moment I closed the app. This morning, I checked the footage, but when I scrolled back to the time of the notification, the video wasn't there. Everything before and after 3 a.m. was recorded as usual, just not that particular time frame, like it had been erased. I spent the entire day trying to rationalize it. Maybe the camera glitched, maybe someone was messing with me. I even told myself it was just a dream, something my groggy brain had cooked up in the middle of the night. But tonight, I'm not so sure. It's happening again. I just got another notification. Motion detected at your front door. And there I am. On the screen, standing perfectly still, just like last night. I haven't moved from my bed. I don't know what to do. I've been staring at the feed for nearly 10 minutes now, and the figure still hasn't moved. Same clothes, same blank expression. No one else is awake, and I'm too terrified to go to the door and look for myself. I feel trapped in my own home. What scares me the most isn't that I'm seeing myself on the screen. It's that this time, the figure is closer to the door. Leaving behind the echoes of that haunting encounter, our next tale beckons from the depths of the unknown. My neighbor keeps his windows shut in the height of summer. I regret finding out why. People always find it so funny that even though I've lived in the same place since I was born, there are roads probably only a couple of 100 meters away from my house that I've never been down. That wouldn't be a big deal if I lived in London, but I'm from a tiny little town, really a village, where everyone knows each other. I won't say which one for obvious reasons, but it's in the English county of Surrey, and it's boring. I don't really know why I don't explore my own town much, but my mother thinks it's an Aspie thing. I know where to go, and I just go there. Going to the park for a kickabout? head left, then go straight. Train station, head left, then take another left. School? That was bus stop B, head left and take a right. We weren't far from the epicenter of our town, if you could call it that, and as far as I was aware, there was nothing on the other side apart from a few rows of semi-detached houses. Of course, that was before I met Luke. Luke moved over from North London 3 years ago, when we were both 15. His parents were one of so many couples who decided to move out of London during COVID. They moved in summer so Luke could settle in before starting sixth form, which, if you're not from the UK, is basically the last 2 years of school and the only bit that's optional. Me and my two mates, Tom and Liam, met Luke in the park on a swelteringly hot day, inviting him to join us for a kickabout that only lasted about 20 minutes before we surrendered to the heat and sat in the shade, pumping him with questions as rural kids inevitably will when encountering anyone new. He was a fun guy to be around. Kind of guy who would never take the piss out of you for no reason, but would roast you back mercilessly if you tried to do the same. We walked back to his parents' house with him, and I found out that he was only a couple of roads away from me. We were neighbors. His road was quiet and peaceful, with nice cars on the driveways and slightly bigger houses than down our way. I didn't tell Luke that I'd never been down his road before. He had a PS5, and his parents were really nice. So we decided to stick around and texted our parents to say we'd be back late. We played FIFA for a while in a round robin, and when it wasn't my turn, I alternated between watching and looking out of the window. The house directly opposite his caught my eye. It looked slightly older than his parents' house, with fading brickwork, but that wasn't what drew my attention to it. Even though it was still a while until sunset, someone was systematically closing every window on the front-facing side of the house. I saw the same arm, its owner obscured behind net curtains, reaching out to close each window before making a hand movement that quickly interpreted as locking it. This strange little ceremony started in the living room, then progressed to the kitchen. Then there was a pause. I interpreted this as the occupant going to the back windows to do the same. Then it resumed upstairs. Before long, every window in the house was closed and locked. The curtains closed and the house dead. After about 20 minutes, I saw a very faint glow coming from the living room windows. The occupant had turned the lights on. Everything about this felt wrong. For one, we were in the middle of a heat wave. For the last few nights, my room had transformed into a sweaty hotbox, and I'd lay awake, uncomfortably melting. Not to mention that this was in the height of COVID, where people were keeping their windows open in the dead of winter, let alone a boiling summer evening. I stared at the house for a few moments, wondering how stuffy and uncomfortable it must have been at the moment. "Luke," I said, nudging him as he played, "who lives across the road?" "Which one?" he asked, not turning around as he skillfully moved past the defense as Mbappe. "The one with the big oak tree outside or the one with the red curtains?" "Red curtains." "Don't know. Got to look at him once. Old guy, beard, keeps to himself. Does he always keep his windows closed? Curtains drawn?" "Yeah, does it every night," he said, pausing the game and looking at me with that excited look people give you when you've noticed the same thing they have. Tom, who by all accounts was about to concede a goal as Juventus, gave a little what the hell shrug. I've watched him a couple of times. "Must be boiling in there," said Liam, his attention now drawn to the window. But he turned away. Liam never had a great attention span. I kept staring at the house. It had signs of life inside. After about 20 minutes, a faint light came on in the kitchen, then went off after a few minutes. I kept watching the house as the sun started to set. Then my attention got diverted as Tom nudged me to tell me it was my turn. For one reason or another, I find it very easy to get fixated on something and much harder to take my mind off. I've got mild Asperger's and self-diagnosed OCD, but take your pick. From there on, whenever I went round to Luke's house, sometimes with the others and sometimes alone, I'd stare at the house and watch the little pre-sunset ritual. It was clockwork, always around 25 minutes before sunset, even as summer drew to a close and night fell earlier and earlier. Luke hadn't taken as much of an interest in it, but he was polite enough to indulge mine. He'd seen the man a few times now, and told me that he got a food delivery every 3 weeks or so, but that was the only time he saw him leave the house. One Saturday morning in September, I managed to get a look at this firsthand. The delivery driver was waiting at least 3 or 4 minutes when the door opened. An older man, in his late 70s maybe, opened the door and walked straight out onto the threshold. He looked like he'd had a few hard years. His skin, even from across the road, looked rough and coarse. His hair was dirty gray and too long for a man his age, coming down to the nape of his neck. He had a thick, ragged beard of the same unsightly color. He was wearing a vest that showed off a surprisingly wiry physique for a man of his age, as well as some mildewy-looking pajama bottoms. What really stood out about him, though, were his eyes. Even from my distant vantage point, I could see that they had a burning energy about them, and the delivery driver, who'd no doubt been about to voice a complaint of being kept waiting for so long, visibly took a step back. The old man's eyes never left the driver as he picked up the shopping, then promptly retreated inside, closing the door immediately behind him. The driver, taken aback, paused for a few moments and took off, heading out the gate much faster than he'd entered. As the school year started and the seasons took a slow slide from summer to autumn, then finally winter, my attention waned when it came to Luke's strange neighbor. His window routine became just another thing happening in the background, just like everything else that could happen in a nothing town like ours. That was until a month ago. Luke and I, now gangly 18-year-olds, had been at the pub celebrating our last exams. Our A-levels, a major set of tests that happen at the end of the 6th form and basically determine which university you can get into. We'd gone back to his to have a few more beers and play some of his newer games. In the 3 years since the two of us had first met, had moved away and Liam had fallen in with some of the rougher kids at school, thinking he was a roadman and giving us a wide berth. It was getting late and I was thinking of going home. I had my phone resting on the windowsill and I grabbed it to check the time. I saw a figure running full pelt down the road. It was the old man, moving with a speed I'd have barely thought credible, his movements seeming to match a younger man. He ran until he got to his house, slamming the gate behind him before unlocking the door in record speed and squeezing himself into it before closing up. I summoned Luke over silently, and we watched the house for the next 20 minutes. Neither of us saying a word, too gripped by fear to make a sound. A few lights went on in the surrounding houses, probably people woken up by the loud closing of the gate and the door, but the old man's house stayed completely pitch black and silent. "What the fuck was that?" Luke said, breaking the deathly silence. "What was he running from?" I asked, knowing how freaked out my voice sounded. "There's an Alsatian a few doors down," he said, scanning the street. "Big beast. Bad temper. If you run from a dog, it'll chase you," I replied, my eyes fixed on the house opposite. Still no signs of life. "Liam?" he asked uncertainly. "He's a little shit, but he wouldn't mug an old man." "What about his mates, though?" "I don't think so." My voice was tense, hollow, and a horrible feeling on my mind. We sat there for half an hour, scanning the road. Then I headed back, looking up and down the street. An eerie silence fell over the whole place, and I shivered in spite of the hot summer night. All the house lights were off now down the road, the occupants deciding to sleep. Now the commotion had passed. I got to my parents' house and turned in. I sleep uneasy. I woke up around noon. "Hey, you did it too when you were on summer holidays," and headed downstairs, deciding that I had to tell my parents about this. Not for them to march over and get to the bottom of a situation, but because they were surprisingly good-sounding boards whenever I had an obsession or neurosis bubble over. I once spent 2 weeks prodding and fretting over what I thought was a dark mole on my shoulder, only for Mum to tell me with an eye roll that it was a birthmark. I saw her in the kitchen with Gary, our new neighbor, a meek-looking man of around 40 years old. Gary was a boring guy, possibly on the low end of the spectrum like me, and hadn't said much of a word to anyone since he'd moved in until my parents had sort of taken him under their wing. He wore what I'd already sussed was his favorite t-shirt, a faded dark AC/DC shirt that had clearly once been black but was now a dull gray. "Morning, love," said Mum, sipping a milky cup of tea. You get in late? Yeah, proper late, I said, joining them. Normally I'd wait until Gary was gone, but he was nice enough and would probably be a fairly sensible sounding board. Listen, I was at Luke's house last night and I saw something weird. Paused. You know that house opposite him? Old man? Red curtains? Yeah, Mum said, nodding. I mean, I know the house, I've never met the owner. He has this bizarre ritual before sunset. All the house windows get closed, curtains drawn, complete blackout. I think some old people do that, said Gary, mildly. They treat it as a daily job because otherwise they'll forget. Probably leave a door open somewhere, get burgled, though no way you'd catch me closing the windows around this time of year. It's bloody hot, said Mum. He did it in the height of COVID too, I said. He's probably an eccentric, said Mum, or he gets cold. Last night I saw him, I said, my voice dropping, running down the road like his fucking life depended on it. I couldn't move that fast if I tried. Well, you do need some exercise, Mum said, flashing me a cheeky grin. You don't get anything from running in computers. You should get down the park, play football or something. He wasn't running to keep fit, I replied. He was being chased. Chased? Chased by who? I don't know. But I stopped. Something Mum said having tripped something off in my brain. I forced an awkward smile and a shrug. He probably was out jogging, I said, trying to sound sincere. One of my little notions, I guess. Mum chuckled and patted my shoulder. It happens, love. Do you want a cup of tea? Nah, I left my coursework at Luke's last night. I lied, getting up. Thought you were done with all that? Yeah, but I want a copy in case they lose it. I'll be back in a couple. I gave her a kiss on the cheek, then after a few paces, turned back. See ya, Gary, I added, having forgotten he was there. They both waved me off, and I headed right back to Luke's, checking Google Maps on the way just to check a hunch from what I could see of the space past the old man's house. Luke, who was still half asleep by the look of things, didn't seem like he'd slept great either. You okay, mate? He said when I knocked on his bedroom door. You forget something? Have you got an old football somewhere? I asked, cutting him off quickly. Probably, he said, puzzled. Maybe in the shed? We headed into his back garden to grab an old football that was tucked neatly under two cobwebby boxes of bric-a-brac. Luke didn't ask any questions as I took it, and we headed out onto the road. We walked down the road and took a sharp right. Mine being a small town, many of the houses didn't back onto anything other than road or open spaces. The side road was bordered by fences on all sides, and we quickly identified the old man's house from the rolled red curtains. I looked up at it. I couldn't see the garden through the fence, but I could see the back of the house. Brickwork here was even more decrepit, and there was ivy that looked overgrown. I placed the ball gently on the ground and chipped it over the fence, hearing it land in the neighbor's garden with a very soft thud. Luke gave a groan in protest, but cut it off, realizing the game plan. I raced back round to the front of the house and knocked on the door. Hearing the sound reverberate inside, there was nothing for a few minutes. Then I heard a strange sound that I immediately recognized as latches or locks, at least 5 or 6 of them, being unlocked. Then the door swung open, and I was greeted with the face that I remembered so well. His eyes blazed harder than usual, no doubt because I was an unscheduled visitor. What? Demanded coarsely. His accent was pure old-school East London, the kind of guttural rasp that was the staple of British gangster films. He didn't take his eyes off me for a second. Hey, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Sorry, me and my mate were kicking a ball around, and I think it went in your back garden. Have you seen it? No. Buck off. He was every bit the charmer I imagined him to be. Do you mind if I come over and grab it? I'll be out of your hair in 2 minutes. You're not coming through this house? He said as if I'd mortally offended him. His face was full of indignant rage, but within a second it changed, and a sort of strange realization came over his hawkish features. What do you want? He asked, putting an insane emphasis on the you. I told you, my ball. Don't act bloody stupid with me, he roared. It's you. You're always watching my house. A chill went down my neck. Of all the times I'd stared at the place, I never considered the idea that its owner was staring back at me. Not for a while, I said, trying to find my words. Yeah, but you're here now, aren't you? He asked, nastily. It's just, I saw you last night, I said, a tiny bit of confidence creeping into my voice. You looked scared. I paused for a moment. You see a lot, don't you? I see a lot too. Another pause. Right. Normally I'd tell you if you so much as look at my house again, I'll kill you. But there's a situation, and I need eyes. He gestured for me to come in. I looked back at Luke, who was standing about 50 steps back, giving a quick shake of my hand to tell him not to worry. Once I was in, he started the complex process of locking the deadbolts on his front door. I'd counted wrong. He had 8. The first thing I noticed about his cramped hallway was the humidity. It hit me as soon as the door closed, stifling and unpleasant. The next thing I noticed were the wooden crosses. There were 6 of them lining each side of the hallway, each of them identical in design, and each looking like they'd been made in a garden shed on a boring afternoon. Most religious folk, my parents included, had a crucifix somewhere within easy viewing, but to have 6 in such rigid formation was a strange sight. He directed me into the living room, and the crosses became normal by comparison. Every inch of the room, including every patch of wall and most of the hardwood floor, was wallpapered by yellowed newspaper article. This wasn't some artsy custom design. It was strikingly clear that every single one of them had been hand-stuck. Some looked like major newspapers, all the physical paper, no printouts of online articles. Some were local papers, including one that was published right here in town. The headlines tended towards the morbid and had a strange focus on missing persons article. Hikers going off on solo trails and not coming back. Kids snatched in the dead of night. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. This didn't feel like some armchair detective. It felt more like a serial killer keeping the reporting of his work like some trophy. The rest of the room was just as humid as the hall and decrepit, with a sofa that looked like it survived the Blitz, and an armchair with probably more mildew stuffed inside its fibers than my whole house combined. The old man directed me to the armchair, and I sat down, fear making my heart pound, wondering whether I should make a run for it and try to throw open the deadbolts before he charged out to grab me. I grew up in Mile End, he said gruffly, sitting down on the sofa. Old terraced council house in one of the roughest roads in the area. People going missing or ending up dead over some small feud or winding up the wrong person. Whole families packing up without a by your leave. It's the exact kind of place where people can disappear. It's the kind of place they thrive. They? Who are they? If I say it, you'll think I'm mad, said, and I repressed the chuckle that had been rising. You're a bright kid. You like to observe, just like I used to. So you tell me. I thought about everything so far. Why he'd reacted so poorly to me asking to come in. The deadbolts. Crosses on the wall. If they existed, I'd say it was vampires, I said, unable to suppress the laugh that came with my words. He stared me dead in the face, those burning eyes not wavering for a second. But come on, continued. You're not telling me that you close all your windows every night because of Count Dracula? He laughed too, a rasping giggle completely devoid of mirth or warmth. Count fucking Dracula, he said. Is that what you think a vampire is, some suave aristo in a cape? He reached for something on the cluttered coffee table and thrust it into my hand. It was a Polaroid. I turned it over to reveal the photo, and my veins pumped with ice. My hand started to shake so badly I almost dropped the photo, and my heart pounded with pure, unrelenting fear. This is AI, said a voice that sounded like mine. It's a 20-year-old Polaroid. I thought you were observant, but you must have. It's not possible. What the fuck is that? My hand still shaking, I raised the photo up and forced myself to study it in more detail. It showed someone that might have once been a man, but whose features were warped beyond all measure. His eyes were the first terrible detail that I noticed. They were jet black, but they weren't smooth like a demon in a Shyamalan. They were bulbous and fleshy and seemed to bulge outward. Those are its pupils, said the old man. When the hunger gets to them, the pupils swell up and expand over its eyes like a massive fleshy sty. But it's not blinded, not by a long shot. Nausea rose up in my throat to join the thick cloud of fear that already dwelt there. Does it hurt him? It, and worse than anything you could imagine. I next looked to the creature's mouth, and the urge to throw up intensified. Lining the creature's mouth were strange needles that protruded horribly from what were otherwise human teeth, thinner than a syringe. But like a syringe that you've accidentally dropped needle first on the floor, every single one of them was bent and twisted horribly. Those are how it feeds, continued, seeing my eyeline move down. Same time as the pupils swell up, these things slide out of the teeth. They start straight. Then a few bites down, they start to catch and bend. The rest of the creature's features were relatively unremarkable. It was pale, but not insanely so, and its head had mats of lanky black hair. I feel like every second I stared at the photo brought me closer to panic. But I forced myself to put it down and engage my brain. There's no way this thing exists, I said, more to myself than the old man. It would be on the internet within days. And even if all this goes away after it's fed, there's no way this sort of monstrosity could go back to looking like a human. You'd be surprised, he said. I've got loads of photos of vampires in their normal form, but only a few in this state. Lucky for me, that whole thing about photos and reflections isn't true. The only thing that marks them out is their eyes. After a couple of years, all that trauma scratches their iris until it's more or less blood red. So what do? They wear contacts, I said, the levity of the joke dying in my mouth. Exactly, said. It's the only thing that works. From everything I've seen, before contact lenses and sunglasses, those always attract attention when worn at night. One of the hardest parts of a vampire's life was hiding their eyes. It's why they're so much bolder than they used to be, and why they hide in plain sight instead of lurking in damp caves. What do you mean, hide in plain sight? It's the way for them now. They move around under different identities, blend in. People invite them in, make them a cup of tea, then come back when you're asleep. Or if they can't get invited, they try to rig the game with loopholes. Anything that could count as an invitation. An open window. A realization hit me like an electric shock. That's why you... Yeah, back when I was a kid, my sister, she was ill. Not the type of ill you recover from. She was hot all the time. She'd sleep with her window wide open in the dead of winter just to cool down. Then one night, one took her. I'm so sorry. How? I paused. How did you know it was a vampire? I killed it. That, tracked it down and killed it. It was weak. My sister's illness had done that when he drained her dry. I had about 50 questions rising to the surface, each resting on the lunatic presumption that what he was telling me was fact. Eventually, I narrowed it down to one that had burned on my brain since I'd walked in. You said there was a situation. I said, finally. I could say that. One of them's here. Although the rational part of my brain still rejected everything he had to say as nonsense, I still felt an intense pang of fear. Here? In town? Right here. It hasn't struck yet. It always waits a little while before starting its nasty work. People go missing as soon as it moves to town, there's questions asked. So how do you know one's here? He reached for a freezer bag on the floor nearby and handed it to me. For a second, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then my brain processed it, and I let out a horrified, nauseated groan. The bag was full of contact lenses, each of them caked in blood. I dropped it on the floor, telling myself I'd use a bucket of hand sanitizer once I got out. Only early warning sign you get, said. Right now it's hungry, getting pangs and transformations most nights. It stalks the night looking for easy opportunities. And as it gets hungrier, it has to keep going through these in case it's spotted. He gave an unpleasant grimace, no doubt imagining with horror the scene of a vampire shedding contact lenses like snakes shed their skin, just like I was. I know you think it's bullshit, but I want you to do something for me, he continued. Watch. Watch, I repeated, puzzled. Yeah, just like you watched my house, watched me, apply that to your road. Whenever you're about to go to bed, just watch your street for, 10 minutes or so. Vampires move around a lot. They'll comb a whole town in a night looking for an opportunity to feed quietly or to scope out future victims. There wasn't much to say after that, so I headed off, telling the full story to Luke, who'd clearly been on the verge of dialing 999. I raced home, Mom not saying much when I washed my hands for 5 minutes straight. She probably wrote it off as a random OCD moment. I spent the rest of that day doing some pre-uni reading, then played on the PS4 until around midnight. Then, scolding myself for giving fantasy even a moment of my time, I went and sat in front of my window, gently prising the net curtains to one side. I didn't stay there for long. It was 20 minutes at the most. My bedroom window directly overlooked the road, and I got a good look at whoever was coming and going. No one did. My town shuts down long before midnight. It wasn't until I was completely convinced that there was nothing or no one passing through that night that I folded the net curtains back over and went to bed. I don't exactly know why I did it, but I returned to that spot at around the same time the next night, and the next night after that. Soon I'd been doing it as a strange little habit for a little over 3 weeks, always starting at the same time and finishing at more or less the same. When I finished, I felt like a night watchman who'd done his duty and was off shift. I never saw anything, of course. Well, nothing sinister. I saw foxes and the occasional neighbor going out to do the bins. But despite staring out into that empty darkness night after night and almost hoping I'd see something out of place, I never did. Until 2 nights ago. It was just when I was first starting to think about turning in. I'd woken up early the night before, having nightmares of strange black-eyed figures gathered on the road in dark hoods, and I was tired. I gave a long scan of the view outside my window, and this time saw a lone figure walking on the other side. It wasn't his gait, which was slightly unusual in a weak, shuffling way that instantly unnerved me. It was the fact that he bent over and clutched his head with his hands. This wasn't a drunk stumbling home and regretting life choices. This was a person in terrible pain. It was a he, though I couldn't make much out of him in the pitch black, did not scream or wail, but the way his whole body shook told me that this was a man in silent agony. After a few terrible moments, he was done, and dropped something on the floor with disregard. I sat there watching in stunned silence as the figure resumed its awkward stride. I felt a loud, rhythmic thudding, and I realized it was my heart pounding. Once he was out of my eye line, I crept downstairs, my parents both being sound asleep. I opened the front door as delicately as I could, taking pains not to close it hard before I made my slow way across the road. Checking the coast was clear of the figure before I got to the other side. He dropped a bloody contact lens. Every rational part of myself scrambled for reasons and justifications, but they were all silenced in an instant. I could feel myself hyperventilate and shake as I stared down at that loathsome object, willing myself to shine a light on it so I could confirm it was some innocuous debris that just looked like a bloody contact lens. But I didn't. Instead, I took off in the direction of the figure, forcing my legs, which felt like jelly, to move. I got to a 3-way turn at the end of my road and panicked slightly, wondering if I'd lost the strange figure. But a small movement in the corner of my eye on the left kept me focused, and I pursued the figure quietly as it made its way down the road. As I continued, I saw where the figure had decided to head. At the end of the road, there were 2 massive oak trees, and between them was a footpath leading to a rickety turnstile. Beyond the turnstile was open woods, an easy place to disappear, especially after dark, and I wouldn't have followed them into those woods if my life depended on it. I crouched by one of the trees as I saw the figure approaching the turnstile. Most of its features were obscured in darkness, but I got a chill as I saw the way it mounted the turnstile. It did so in a way that was equivalent to hauling its limbs at great effort onto the decrepit structure. As it swung a leg over the gap, I waited for it to haul the other one over and make the crossing. But it didn't. It stopped midway, stood statue still atop the turnstile for a few seconds. It seemed to be scanning its surroundings, and I heard what sounded like a loud, distinctive sniff. Then it turned its head in my direction, my heart thumping like an intense bass coming from a car's subwoofer. I shifted my head slightly, concealing myself from view behind the tree, trying to still get a view of the figure through a small gap in the tree. I couldn't see much. Terror gripped every single string of muscle in my body, and I fought the urge to start running. The figure dismounted the turnstile and walked a few awkward steps back down the footpath. I couldn't bear to move a muscle. It stopped around 5 meters from me and stood deathly still. Then I heard another terrible sniff. I tried to see the creature's face, and while it was too dark to make its features out, I knew it would have looked like the Polaroid I'd seen. After a terrible few moments, the creature turned on its heel and went back to the turnstile. I stayed completely still as it crossed into the woods and disappeared from sight, then stayed in that position for at least 10 more minutes, convinced that if I moved so much as a muscle, that unknown horror's head would reappear on the side of the turnstile, and those horrific needle teeth would clamp around my neck as I screamed in agony. Once I was convinced that the vampire wasn't coming back, I shakily forced myself up and made my way home. It wasn't until I was at the end of the road that my knees buckled in terror, forcing me to grab onto a brick wall as something clicked for me that hadn't at first. It's the same thing that gives me uncontrollable shakes even when writing this a day later. It was the realization that, while the creature's face had been in complete darkness, I actually got a slight look at his clothes, and more specifically, his top half. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt. Now, shifting from one eerie corner to the next, prepare to delve into a new mystery that defies explanation. She scares me. This is a story I will tell you that scares me to this day. As a child growing up in the early 90s, I always had a reoccurring nightmare that has been relevant to this day. I'm 35 years old, but this nightmare has always been a thing for me. Literally can't sleep without this being a thing. And now it's becoming more real. I always had the sleep paralysis demons blah blah during my early childhood. 4 years old, and I had night terrors, colicky, what they used to call a difficult baby from 1 to 3 years old. But when I hit 4 years old, I was able to communicate to my parents the stress of my dreams. This was only the beginning of the gift, as I came to call it later in life. Imagine being in a dream, but knowing consciously that it is a dream, so you can take control of yourself or your actions. Lucid dreaming comes to mind. Imagine that power at 6 years old, and all you see is fucked up shit. Demons slowly slicing your mom's neck. Seeing your father getting dipped into acid, burning off his skin while he screams, then his bones, screaming even more. This was my daily dreams at 4 to 6 years old, so I found a way, consciously take control of the dream. My mother is getting boiled alive? That's just not happening. Now I'm saving her consciously while I'm sleeping. My dad is getting burned? Nah, he's fine now. I'm in control of all of this. I figured it out. When I'm asleep, I'm on control. Regardless of the images presented to me, fuck you, I'm controlling this. Or so I thought. When you gain true control of an unconscious sleep, there's rules to the ability. Never acknowledge that you have gained control. Never ever eat or drink anything offered to you. 3. If you can figure out how to fly, take advantage of it. This is your one shot to find true freedom. Don't waste it. So I went through about 15-ish years of lucid dreams without any kind of repercussions. Followed the rules, never had an issue. Until one night, I had this dream. I was walking through a typical abandoned psych ward, and I got on an elevator, pushed the button to 3. When it got up there, the doors opened, and I saw a long corridor with doors on the left and the right side. But at the end of the hallway, there was a woman. Gray hair, balding, elderly. She had a raspy kind of cackle. Originally, her face towards the floor. I couldn't see her face. Then she called and looked up towards me. Mind you, I'm still in the elevator. She's a good 7 rooms down on this floor. But when she looked up at me, her eyes were flashing black and white. Imagine like a donut of white with a black border, but it just keeps going over and over, like the old spiral psychosis things from the 50s. She asked me, "Ha ha ha, aren't you a little too early?" and then proceeded to fly at me down the corridor, screaming one consistent scream, but getting louder and louder as she got closer. As I'm pressing the buttons in the elevator to escape this, the doors close. She hits and screams the doors until I eventually ove upwards in the elevator. Everything goes quiet as I hit level 7. The doors open. It's the same exact floor and the same exact layout, except there's no crazy-eyed gray woman. I take a tentative step outside of the elevator, making sure I keep a hand on the door. This floor is basically a hallway with countless doors on the left or right of me. Shadow appears and tells me, "These are all the decisions you could have made in your life. I will grant you one look, one opportunity to see what it is, was, or could be. Choose carefully. as it could come to pass. I don't understand it because I'm still feeling from the old woman and I'm scared out of my mind. But I walk down this hallway, touching doors, feeling the energy. This one's cold. Fuck that. This one feels right, but I don't trust it. This one is off. Eventually, I end up on a door that feels very similar to the closet door in my bedroom, where I usually go to hide from everything when I feel scared. It makes sense to me. When I opened that door, there she was. Scream laughing at me, eyes black and white, and she dug her nails into my face. I woke up screaming, and to this day I have scars underneath my left eye. Exiting the realm of the paranormal, we step into a world where the line between fact and legend blurs even further. I found a hidden door in my apartment, and it wasn't on the blueprint. Series. I've lived in this apartment for almost 2 years, and until last night, I thought I knew every inch of it. It's a small, one-bedroom place. Nothing fancy, just a decent spot that's close to work. The building itself is one of those old Milltown buildings, with an apartment up top and businesses on the lower level, with a hallway that separates the two. It's where the business owners would live when the town first established. It's in the downtown area of a very, very small town. Nothing exciting. When I first moved in, the landlord, Shane, gave me a blueprint of the unit, a very old blueprint. At the time, I thought it was strange. You see, it's normal to get a layout print when in the process of renting just to see the floor plan. But who gives a blueprint showing the electrical layout, the water line, basically the entire construction layout for a one-bedroom apartment? It was weird. But what made it even more odd was Shane himself. He's always been off. You know the type? Quiet, always watching, never really says much unless he absolutely has to. He wears Damer-style glasses and combs his hair over a hole in his toboggan. He's balding. I'm Southern. Shut up. He dresses in blue short-sleeve coveralls and adjourns himself only in the jewelry that has a few ink pens in his pocket and a very musty odor. The most intimidating part about him is his height. The man is 6'11", not joking. Anyway, the first day I met him, he just stood there, staring at me for a moment before handing over the keys from his Hulk-sized hand, muttering something about making sure everything's in order. Even when he gave me the blueprint, he wouldn't look me in the eye, just said, "You'll want to hold on to this," like it was some kind of secret. I almost laughed at how serious he was being. I should have asked more questions then, but I'm a dumb welder, and I do what I have to do to get by. Last night, while trying to fix a leaky pipe under the sink, because Shane's phone, for some reason, always goes to voicemail when shit goes wrong, I noticed something strange. My hand slipped, and the wrench clanged loudly against the wall behind the cabinet. The sound it made, it wasn't right. It was hollow. For a second, I thought I imagined it. Curiosity got the better of me. I knocked on the wall, and sure enough, there was an empty space behind it. I thought it was kinda odd, but I tried to not let it bug me too much. However, I've read a lot of horror stories and seen a lot of videos of people finding hidden rooms in their homes, so I didn't sleep much after that. This morning, I pulled out the blueprint that Shane had given me. No hidden rooms, no extra spaces. It was all supposed to be solid, but that hollow sound kept gnawing at me. So I grabbed a hammer and started chipping away at the wall. Behind it, there was a door. A small, old wooden door, barely 4 feet high, painted the same color as the wall so it blended in perfectly. I checked the blueprint again. No mention of a door. No mention of a hidden room. Nothing. I can't stop thinking about how weird Shane was when he gave me that blueprint. Why would he go through the trouble of giving me this if it didn't even show this? Why didn't he tell me about the door? Why didn't he look me in the eye? I don't know what's behind it. Something about it feels very wrong, like it's been waiting all this time, just hidden till now. I'm gonna get to the shop. I got too many orders coming through to worry about it. People need drive lines and their tanks and trailers repaired, but maybe somebody here knows something about old buildings and help. Anyway, if anything comes of it, I'll let y'all know. From one unsettling tale to another, brace yourselves for a journey through the unexplained, where fear takes on a new form. The darkness inside me led me to a scary village. This was many years ago. My father died very early, and I lived with my mother. When I was 8 years old, My mother and I were invited by her relatives to visit her hometown in the countryside. My mother was very reluctant, but I don't know what her relatives told her. She agreed to go back. The village is located in the mountains. My mother and I took a taxi to go, but the taxi stopped at the foot of the mountain. My mother did not know what to say to the driver. The driver wondered, "That village has never heard of. Maybe I am new to it." My mother and I had to go deeper into the mountain. The village in the mountains had existed since the Song dynasty and was largely isolated, and my mother had escaped from it, not knowing why. My mother and I walked for a long time to find the mountains surrounded by fog. My head a little dizzy. My mother picked me up and said a lot of words I did not understand. Whenever I dizzy, mother always used this way to solve. Every summer, my head always gets dizzy. Your mind will recall some memories that are not your own. My mother carried me up and down the misty mountain, and she couldn't seem to find her way home. At this time, an old man appeared in the fog of the mountains. He wore a bamboo hat and shabby clothes. He was thin as if his skin was glued to the skeleton. Greeted us with a smile. My mother kept silent. She was full of sweat. The old man saw that we did not respond, so he left. After the old man left, my mother suddenly changed her mind and wanted to leave this misty mountain forest. She did not go out for a long time, until we came to a village. The village is smog-free, but it looks eerie to be standing in the smog. My mother was very frightened. She kept running, but could not run out of the haze area. My head began to suffer again, and this time there appeared in my mind a green-faced monster, or rather, a green-faced face. The face is constantly changing and always turns into a black sphere. At this time, there appeared in front of the team wearing red and carrying sedan chairs, as if the ancient kind of wedding team. My mother took me to hide among the trees next to her. The team seemed to have no breath of life, emitting bursts of putridical odor. Passing by our side, the sedan chair came from bursts of yelling. My mother, fighting back tears and fear, clamped her hands over my mouth. My body trembled uncontrollably, like an angry beast trying to break out of its cage. My mother didn't let go until the wedding procession was long gone. But my mother stood up and found that the mountain road had been covered with people. Be precise, humanoid creatures, all of them pale, and their skin was very loose, as if it were human skin hanging on the top. They looked at my mother as if they were telepathic. I finally saw their faces, like the old man's, smiling strangely, thin as if skin had stuck to a skeleton. My mother carried me to the path, which was basically a pile of graves. The mother cried again while complaining that she had fled the sacrifice, but her child was innocent, and said, "Why the female ghost? Why revenge still want to kill so many people?" Along the way we saw a lot of scary monsters, countless black cats in the trees, mice as big as cows coming out of the graves, and huge, rotten, scary humanoid monsters. Only, we ran to the village, and the wedding party was waiting for us. There was a fearful laugh from inside the sedan chair, and then a pair of pale hands lifted the curtain. A woman with disheveled hair. No, it should be a monster with disheveled hair and a red dress, her face as white as death, her nails as red as blood. My mother looked at this scene in despair. As if she knew that there would be such a day, she put me down and shouted for me to run. But the woman came to my mother's side in an instant. Her strength was outrageous, directly pulled my mother's hair, and then forcibly tore her hair and face down. Mother fell to the ground. She looked at me desperately and said to me, "Run." The woman laughed and said, "I want everyone in the world to feel my resentment." I was too scared to walk. The woman walked in front of me, the mother with the last strength to pull her. The woman directly with the hand to my mother's head pulled off. My once kind mother died in this way, and my mind kept recalling the fragments of the past. Because that official made a mistake and let those 108 demons out. Our children are dark stars. Why should that woman kill herself out of love and let others die with her? The green-faced beast cannot be our child, and even if he were, we cannot kill him. My sadness, anger, and resentment filled my brain. This woman came to me with laughter. I hated her for killing my mother. My mother was innocent. I burst into tears, but my cry gradually turned into a roar, and the sky that had been covered by haze suddenly appeared a black sphere. Much like the sun, I hear countless ghosts howling in pain. The woman screamed in horror and tried to kill me with all her hatred. I hated her, and I wanted to destroy her. Her body was torn apart by me, and though I did not know what I had become, I felt that her soul had been destroyed by me. The countless ghosts of the mountain were all annihilated, and the hateful light from the black sphere lit up the sky. This is my memory, and then I read a novel, which recorded the story of 108 devils that destroyed the Song dynasty, and the green-faced beast was one of them. I also learned the story of a woman in the mountain village who committed suicide because of love. But it doesn't matter, I'll find 107 other cousins. As we bid farewell to that chilling tale, prepare to enter another dimension, fear. I relive it every night. The incident I'm about to describe happened November 7th, 2013. Enjoy my recurring nightmare. I have pictures if anyone is interested. My father, Ryan Williams, was hit and killed by semi after a mechanical failure caused his inability to come to stop before the car crossed the highway. That was in April of 1995. Flash forward 2 months, and I was born. Fatherless son to a scared teenage mother. When I was 9, my mother met my stepdad, who was a major prick then, but were good now, and moved to where he was raised. This part begins 12 years ago, when I was right about to start my senior year of high school, fall of 2012. I went to a small school in the middle of Kansas, the type of area where literally the GPS doesn't work on most roads. My family lived on a farm, over a mile from the closest neighbors. We didn't have crops ourselves, only my uncle does the farming side. Since Grandpa Mike passed on Halloween 2004, freak accident, he got trapped under the hydraulic bed of a grain truck and subsequently got crushed. My stepdad moved his business, he fixes welders and generators, to a shop that he had built in the backyard. The same dirt mound Grandpa passed away moving was where the shop now sits. Not important, just really cool to me. I didn't have a ton of friends due to social issues, but I did have a plan. In order to try to live up to my real dad's name, I enlisted in the Army pulling MOS 11 X-ray Op 40 after scoring a 92 on the ASVAB. I'm not sure if that means the same, but then it was infantry with ranger option. I went to Kansas City, did all the physicals, signed a plethora of paperwork, and got swore in. My parents were extremely happy with me for what seemed like the first time in my life. I hit the weight room like crazy to help prepare. I had ran cross-country for 3 years but wanted to make sure I was strong as well. I started playing football, love of the game, hated most of the team though, but feelings were definitely mutual. One day at practice, before the first game even, we were doing Oklahoma drills. My blocker missed his assignment, and I got absolutely rocked by the 2 free defenders. I played fullback, tightened on offense, and corner outside linebacker on defense. In fact, I was rocked so hard, couldn't get up right away. Turns out I had gotten high-load at full speed by 2 guys that were much larger than I. That's where your legs get taken out one way and your top half gets taken the other. I was then made fun of by my teammates, coaches, all who saw and limped my way back to the locker room, dealing with the worst pain in my hips I've ever felt. Simultaneously wearing the badge again as the weird kid that just couldn't do what the guys did. The outcast who never fit in. Joke's on them, because my mom's a nurse and immediately knew it was worse than just a hard hit. I had an MRI the following day to reveal I was born with, or developed at a young age, I guess. Femoral atibular impingement in both hips. My femur on both sides has flat spots instead of a round head, which caused both hips to have partially popped from their sockets. It didn't take long to receive the news that my freshly started football career was over. So much love for a game I would never get to taste. When my recruiter from the Army had heard the news, he absolutely shattered what had been my lifelong goal. I was no longer eligible for enlistment, said that I wouldn't be able to carry my duties up to my previous potential, let alone uphold their standard via text message at that. No more football, no more Army. I knew I wasn't going to get into college the traditional way. My GPA was below par due to me just not doing homework. No one's fault but my own. However, I passed every test, so I continued to be moved along. Upon realizing that I had nothing to continue school for, my principal, Mr. Goodhart, I will always miss/love that man for everything he did for me, suggested I get my GED. He called my mother and made arrangements for me to take the test, even coming out to the farm to drive me there himself. I took the practice exam and missed one, so I didn't have to take classes or anything. The official test was just a few days later. Again, I missed one. To this day, I wish I knew what it was. Turns out that kind of score gets you 1 semester free at the local community college. My mother could be proud again. I technically had a graduation and was going to go to college. I figured since I wanted to be in the Army so badly, I would take law enforcement as a career path. Knowing that I was never wanting to just be another cop, I decided to take psychology as well. High hoping to be a detective, then possibly a profiler for larger, more heinous crime. Things for a couple months seemed pretty awesome. Then I met a girl named, let's say Anne, and I worked together at a restaurant waiting tables. I had never been good with girls due to the whole exile the weirdo kid thing. It's whatever now, I get it. So I was super nervous when I finally got the courage to ask her out. You couldn't believe my joy inside when she smiled and said yes. We went out, got dinner, walked around a lake that was in town, just talking. We decided we wanted to watch The Conjuring. It just came out on DVD, so we went to Walmart to buy it. After making the purchase, we ran into some of her friends, who she stopped to chat with. One of them accidentally let slip that Anne was indeed pregnant with a previous fling's baby, like maybe 6 weeks, pretty early. She looked at me with sorrowful eyes and said she understood if I wanted to drop her off and forget about it. However, as a guy on my first real date, I told her it didn't bother me really, as long as I didn't have to worry about the other guy trying to kill me. She assured me it was fine, and the date continued. We went back to her dorm room, where we watched The Conjuring, talked about everything we saw in the future, cuddled, it's literally it, perverts, and eventually we fell asleep. I awoke Saturday morning in a panic. I looked at my phone and saw I was going to be late for work. I had to drive back to my parents', which was about 30 minutes north, to get my work's clothes and shower. Everything felt awesome. I finally had direction, a plan. It was all falling into place. That was until I went to cross the main highway 3 miles south of where my parents lived. I don't remember coming to the intersection at all, but according to the police report, I had pulled my 1992 Buick Century across the highway at 20 miles per hour after briefly stopping at the sign. I must not have seen the fully loaded pickup, complete with grill guard and a cattle trailer, with 3 bovine passengers moving at approximately 70 miles per hour. The only thing I remember was right after, I took my seatbelt off, leaving my bloody thumbprint on the button, but didn't have the strength to get the door open. I thought, just get out the window, as they had all been shattered, and made my move across the seats. No quicker than my initial move, I got extremely dizzy and lost conscience, sprawled out across the bench, reaching toward the broken passenger window. Everything was an instant shade of black, darker than then when you're in a cave with no light. Felt like swimming in water that I couldn't see, feel, or even hear. Inside of a vast nothingness that seemingly had no end, I was stripped of my senses. I couldn't remember exactly how I got there, but I knew inside my soul by the growing, nauseating pain of realization that I had died. At first, pure disbelief washed over me. I was just there. How could I have died? Not even 10 minutes ago, I had the window down, music up, the November sun on my skin, and the cool fall breeze whipping through my freshly gelled hair. That's when I remembered taking my seatbelt off and attempting my escape from that tomb of twisted metal and glass. I was then angry at myself for letting us die, angry at world for its abhorrent unfairness, and angry at whoever hit me. I know the report says I rolled through the stop sign, but it's never sat right with me for 4 reasons. 1, I learned how to drive on that very road. My parents always preached extreme caution when it came to that highway. 2, it's not necessarily a blind crossing, but it is on an incline right after a dip if you look to the west, where the oncoming truck was coming from. 3, I never wanted to die, just like my father had. I absolutely used what little maturity I had when I was behind the wheel, out of fear of sharing the fate of the man I had never gotten to meet. 4, The report also stated I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, which would be completely implausible thanks to my one memory and a bloody thumbprint. Sorry, back to the abyss. I tried to wrap my mind around this revelation, thinking about all I had left behind, realizing I would never get the chance to finally make my parents and family proud. Grief had started to replace the anger. My insides no longer felt the trembling rage of my teenage angst. Instead, the trembling slow lid turned into static nothingness, growing into an overwhelming sensation of the life that I had wasted. I went to wipe the tears from eyes when I figured out I couldn't feel my face. At this same moment, I did feel something, though. It was the feeling of the equivalent to a baseball bat to back of my skull. I focused on the pain and felt it again, this time accompanied by a sound. Boom. The first thing I had heard since the song that was playing at the intersection. Ironically, it was Seether's aptly titled Fine Again. I'll always hold that song closer to me than anyone else. Wish I could tell Sean Morgan this story. And before you ask, I learned what song was playing because after we removed the head unit, the CD was stuck in it. I put into a different car, and it wouldn't stop skipping on the part where he says, "And I'm not scared now, I must assure you, you're never gonna get away." Instant goosebumps, the moment the speakers crackled out the words. Just thought you would enjoy that tidbit. This is the first time I've written this, and I'm breaking up the memory with a fun fact so I can breathe again. Boom. A third time. In words that will probably only make sense to myself, I swam upwards toward the thunderous sound until I saw a pinhole of light. The smallest light in an existence, a blackened shadow, was the brightest I had ever seen. I fought as hard as I could towards it, willing the body I couldn't feel towards my beacon in the sky. As I got closer, the percussionary sound was joined in by a metallic clicking that I could not place. Boom! Clink! What could that be? I thought as more pain erupted from back of head. I pressed onward through the stream of confusion and relentless waves of pain. I kicked the feet I couldn't feel and reached out with arms I couldn't see. Not knowing what else to do, I prayed to God. Just let me see the source behind this light. I have to know what that sound is, please. I got closer, like looking into a peephole, and that's when I took one final empty breath, thanked God for hopefully answered prayers, and plunged myself from the abyss of shattered dreams and a life cut short into the speck of light. I bolted straight up, gasping for the oxygen. I'd just been so desperate to feel. With the air rushing into me, so did the gravity of the situation, accompanied by the symphony of pain erupting in a crescendo from seemingly every part of the orchestra that was my body. At first I thought I only managed to pull myself from that abysmal purgatory and into waiting arms of Satan himself. As many hands wrapped around me, forcing me back down, screamed from the pain. The sound resonating from inside of me bared a similarity of someone figuring out how to use their voice for the first time. I screamed until my throat cracked, ending in a raspy, blood-speckled cough. My final battle cry before facing Lucifer and his band of demons, I turned to face the composer of my eternal torment. It wasn't an evil tiefling whose jealousy and pride landed him the role of king of hell. There wasn't a band of demons ready to commit atrocities at their frontman's will. It was a very surprised doctor and a group of wonderful nurses. The light that I had seen was not a peephole set alight by the fires of what could have been. It was the surgical light above the operating table. "What's going on? What happened?" I choked out as they laid me back down. "You've been in an accident, you're in the hospital, a lot of people didn't think you'd make it." I immediately asked the question that was burning inside of me. "What's the boom click sound?" "You have a pretty significant crack on the back of your head. We need to put more staples in." I have no idea how those capeless heroes are able to immediately stay calm and do their life-saving work, and half-gone college kids bolt up from dead. They will always have my gratitude. "What happened to me?" I repeated, trying to understand the current circumstance. "You were hit by a truck crossing a highway, and they airlifted you here, son. To this day, I apologize to the people I owe my life to for the only response I said before losing consciousness again. But I can't die, not like that. That's how my dad died." And I was out. Almost 11 years later, I'm still here. I'm married, 4 kids, and a permanent limp. Funny enough, people hit me did not have valid paperwork and were never seen again after they left the hospital. The driver had a sore neck and other a broken arm. Unfortunately, 2 of the beef gods in the back lost their lives. For that, I am sorry. I'm as good as what I'll ever get with it. Come a long ways. I always have the scars from where the glass ripped through arm, shoulder, from where the doctors had to insert a chest tube to drain the fluids from my lung. Fun fact, it really hurts when a meaningful but absent-minded nurse kicks the drainage box over and pops the stitch, pulling the tubing out 6 inches from your chest cavity like an angry, girthy spaghetti. However, I don't think my head has healed quite right at night. It comes back with a memory or a dream where I'm trapped there again. But this time, I can't get into the peephole. Then, when I finally do, I just bolt awake and have to go the rest of the day acting like I'm fine. But other than that, it's pretty cool with me now. Just wish I didn't relive it every night.